Hey there, tonight we're diving into the cunning world of Roman senators, where survival meant mastering the art of subtlety. Not the cinematic backstab fest you might picture, but a dance of whispered alliances and veiled threats. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. If you find yourself waking up as a Roman senator, congratulations. You've hit the political jackpot of ancient Rome, but don't get too comfortable. Sure, you're part of the 300-member club that practically runs the world, but this isn't some laid-back toga party. Speaking of togas, that garment is your uniform, your status symbol, and your financial headache all rolled into one. A toga costs you a whopping 30 denarii. That's like blowing your entire month's coffee budget on a single outfit, and it's not even machine washable. Now, let's talk about where you hang out, the Senate. The word itself might conjure up images of solemn debates and grand speeches. Reality check. Think more along the lines of a high-stakes game of Survivor. The Senate is where political alliances are forged over wine and broken over sharper daggers. You're constantly balancing on the cursus honorum, the career ladder that's more like a tightrope stretched over boiling lava, or in your case, the political abyss. The cursus honorum is your pathway to power, assuming you don't get shoved off it by a rival. You start as a quaestor, handling finances, and hope not to end up as one of those named as a defendant in an embezzlement scandal. Next, you aim for aedile or tribune, roles that involve public works or plebeian interests. Basically, you're either fixing Rome's potholes or pretending to care about the common folk. After that comes praetor, where you get your hands on some real authority, like a judge with a penchant for theatrics, because in Rome, the law is as much about drama as it is about justice. But the golden apple of this treacherous ladder is the consulship. 2 spots once a year, and everyone wants one. If you snag this title, you've made it to the top. But remember, the higher you climb, the harder the fall. Julius Caesar himself entered this political arena, and we all know how his story ended. Et tu, Brute. So what's a day in your life like? Well, it's not all backstabbing and plotting. You start with a trip to the Forum, sipping watered-down wine instead of the espresso you clearly need. Here, you'll exchange pleasantries with other senators, but let's face it, everyone's watching each other like hawks. You're not just making friends, you're also trying to figure out who's got your back, and who's sharpening a metaphorical knife behind it. Your afternoon is spent drafting or debating laws, a task that's about as exciting as watching paint dry, if that paint could suddenly declare war on Carthage. And once the sun sets, you attend lavish dinner parties where the real politics happen. Overstuffed couches and overflowing goblets are where alliances are made, and occasionally where your career might meet an untimely end if you drink the wrong cup. Rome's political landscape is a fervent mix of tradition and chaos. Every decision, every vote is a roll of the dice. Take a wrong step, and you could find yourself exiled or worse. Ask Cicero. 1 minute you're delivering speeches lauded for their eloquence, and the next, you're packing your bags for a very extended vacation. Of course, this tightrope walk isn't all doom and gloom. The Senate is where you can shape the future of Rome, even if it's just a future that looks suspiciously like your own ambitions. You're part of a legacy that includes not just Caesar and Cicero, but also the mythical Romulus, who supposedly founded Rome, and in a delightful twist of irony, supposedly murdered his own brother to do so. Family drama, Roman style. So how do you survive? Be smart, be sly, and keep your friends close but your rivals closer. Remember, in the political jungle of ancient Rome, you're not just playing the game, you're living it. And if you play it well, you might just hang onto your toga and your head. Just when you think you've got this whole Roman political scene figured out, let's dive into the real meat of the matter, the art of persuasion. Forget what you know about modern political debates or TED talks. Roman rhetoric was an entirely different beast. In this world, eloquence was not just admired, it was demanded. You weren't just convincing a room full of senators. You were performing for an audience that could make or break your career faster than you can say, Veni, Vidi, Vici. The Curia, the Senate House, was your stage, and words were your weapons. Crafting a speech was akin to assembling a strategic battle plan. A successful oration could propel you up the cursus honorum like a well-aimed catapult. But here's a little spoiler. The power of words wasn't just about what you said, but how you said it. It was the ancient equivalent of going viral, except instead of likes and retweets, you were after votes and alliances. Here's the catch. Not everyone was born with a silver tongue. Enter the orators, Rome's answer to today's political consultants and speechwriters. Hiring a top-notch orator could cost you upwards of 10,000 sesterces. For perspective, that's about the price of 8 luxury villas, or in today's terms, enough to fund a pretty decent ad campaign. You could either spend your time perfecting your rhetoric, or pay someone who's already mastered the art. Most senators opted for the latter. After all, why risk bumbling your words when you could have Cicero, the master orator himself, making you sound like the next big thing since sliced bread? That is, if bread had been sliced back then. It wasn't just about standing in front of the Senate and waxing poetic about the glory of Rome. Speeches were meticulously crafted to appeal to the audience's emotions, logic, and sense of tradition. You had to be part poet, part lawyer, and part actor. And as with any good performance, timing was everything. A well-placed pause or a dramatic hand gesture could win over even the most skeptical of senators. But hold your horses. Don't let the glamour of rhetoric fool you. The reality was that behind those illustrious speeches and grandiloquent gestures, there was a web of strategic alliances and backroom deals that would make even Machiavelli blush. Yes, the myth of the lone orator swaying the Senate with his sheer eloquence is just that, a myth. Often, the real work was done away from the prying eyes of the public, in dimly lit rooms over copious amounts of wine. You see, Rome was a city where who you knew was often more important than what you said. The right connections could turn a mediocre speech into a political triumph. It was less about the words and more about the whispers. Senators would engage in quid pro quos that would make your head spin. Need support for your new law? No problem. But remember that favor when it's time to vote on that grain distribution bill. To navigate this labyrinth, you needed allies, preferably influential ones. These alliances were often cemented through marriage, shared interests, or mutual enemies. It was a game of chess, where each move had to be calculated and precise. A misstep could lead to scandal, exile, or worse, an unfortunate accident involving a stray dagger. So, while the public might have been enamored by your brilliant rhetoric, the savvy senators knew the real game was played offstage. Eloquence was the shiny distraction, the smoke and mirrors concealing the gritty reality of Roman politics. Yet, despite the theatrics, rhetoric remained an essential tool. It was the art of persuasion that provided the veneer of civility to what was often a brutal power struggle. In this world, you had to be both a master of words and a maestro of manipulation. The balance between eloquence and influence was delicate. Push too hard, and you risked alienating your supporters. Play it too safe, and you'd be left in the dust by bolder senators. As you can see, surviving the political jungle of ancient Rome was no small feat. It required a deft touch, a talent for persuasion, and the ability to navigate the murky waters of alliances and rivalries. History may remember the speeches, but the truth is, they were just the tip of the iceberg. The real drama unfolded in the shadows, where deals were made and fates were sealed. So, while the romantic image of the lone orator swaying the masses might hold some charm, remember that behind every great speech was a web of intrigue and strategy. In Rome, persuasion was both an art and a science, and mastering it was your ticket to power and prestige. But keep your wits about you. In a city where words could make empires rise and fall, you never knew who might be plotting your downfall. Stay tuned, because in the political theater of Rome, the show is far from over. Speaking of Roman political theater, let's delve into the plot twists and cliffhangers that rival any modern-day drama. Buckle up, because Roman politics weren't just about eloquence. They were a roller coaster of intrigue, bribery, and yes, assassination plots. Imagine House of Cards, but with more sand, sandals, and stabbing. First up, the Catiline conspiracy, a scandal so juicy it could make tabloid headlines today. Picture Lucius Sergius Catilina, Catiline to his friends, enemies, and everyone in between, an ambitious senator with a talent for rubbing people the wrong way. In 63 BC, Catiline decided that if he couldn't climb the political ladder the usual way, he'd just kick the whole thing over. His plan: overthrow the Republic. Subtlety clearly wasn't his strong suit. Catiline roped in a ragtag group of disgruntled aristocrats and debt-ridden followers. They plotted to assassinate several key senators, including Cicero, the then consul and Rome's reigning rhetorical heavyweight. But Catiline's plan was as leaky as a Roman aqueduct in need of repair. Cicero caught wind of the conspiracy, thanks to an informant whose name has been lost to history, but probably deserves a nod here. Cicero took the Senate floor and unleashed the kind of verbal smackdown that only a master orator could deliver. His speeches, known as the Catiline orations, were so fiery they practically set the Curia ablaze. Cicero famously opened with, "O tempora, O mores," which roughly translates to, "Oh, the times, oh, the manners," a catchphrase that could easily double as a Twitter rant today. With Cicero's words echoing through the city, Catiline's conspiracy unraveled faster than you can say, et tu, brute. Catiline fled Rome, only to meet his end in a battle against the forces loyal to the Republic. Meanwhile, his co-conspirators faced execution, courtesy of a Senate that wasn't in the mood for forgiveness. Now, let's address the elephant, or should we say, the Praetorian Guard, in the room. These were the elite soldiers tasked with protecting the emperor, and their loyalty was supposedly rock solid. But in the cutthroat world of Roman politics, loyalty was less of a moral compass and more of a commodity. A well-placed bribe of 500 denarii, roughly the annual salary of a legionary, could turn these protectors into potential pawns. The Praetorian Guard's role in political intrigue is best illustrated in the year of the 4 emperors, 69 AD, when Rome saw more leadership changes than a soap opera. After Emperor Nero's dramatic departure from the throne and life, the Guard played a pivotal role in the rapid-fire succession of Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian. Each emperor had to secure the Guard's favor, often by emptying the imperial coffers with hefty donatives, essentially lavish bonus checks for the Guards. This brings us to the blurred lines between corruption and clever politicking. In Rome, the two were often indistinguishable. Bribery was less a scandal and more a standard operating procedure. Want to win an election? Better grease some palms. Need a law passed? Time to call in those favors. It's like a political quid pro quo on steroids. And while we're busting myths, let's talk about the romanticized image of Roman senators as paragons of virtue. Spoiler alert, they weren't. Sure, Rome had its share of noble statesmen, but many were as self-serving as they come. Take Marcus Licinius Crassus, for example, one of the wealthiest men in Rome, whose fortune was built not just on savvy investments, but also on buying up properties at fire sale prices during Rome's frequent fires. Talk about making a killing in real estate. The truth is, Rome's political landscape was a complex web of ambition, corruption, and power struggles. Senators weren't just lawmakers. They were power brokers in a city where influence was the ultimate currency. It wasn't enough to be a skilled orator or a shrewd strategist. You needed to be both. And even then, a well-timed conspiracy could send you packing to the political afterlife. The stakes were high, and the risks even higher. Assassination was a very real threat, lurking like a shadow over every political maneuver. Julius Caesar's fate, betrayed by friends and foes alike, served as a chilling reminder that even the most powerful could fall. And yet, despite the dangers, the allure of power kept the Senate seats filled with eager contenders. As you can see, navigating Roman politics was less about maintaining the status quo and more about staying afloat in a sea of sharks. Every senator was both predator and prey, constantly watching their backs while plotting their next move. It was a world where paranoia was practically a job requirement, and survival depended on equal parts skill, luck, and a touch of ruthlessness. Stay tuned, because we're not done yet. The political saga of ancient Rome has more twists and turns than a Colosseum chariot race, and we're just getting started. In the grand theater of Roman politics, the show must go on, and trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Now that we've unpacked the political minefield of ancient Rome, let's slip into the social sandals of a Roman senator and explore the glittering social circus that was as vital to survival as any backroom deal. After all, in a city bursting at the seams with 1 million souls, networking was as crucial as knowing which dagger to dodge. First stop on this whirlwind tour, the lavish banquets. Forget your average dinner party. These were Epicurean extravaganzas, and you better come ready to impress. Hosting one could set you back a jaw-dropping 100,000 sesterces. For a bit of context, that's enough to keep a legion of soldiers fed and watered for weeks. But in Rome, the real currency wasn't just silver, it was social clout. Imagine reclining on a sumptuous couch, surrounded by the who's who of Roman society. Senators, generals, poets, and philosophers, all vying for attention over a spread that would make even the most decadent of foodies blush. We're talking peacock tongues, stuffed dormice and garum, a fermented fish sauce that was basically the ketchup of the ancient world. Bon appetit, if you dare. But why splash out on such opulence? Simple. In Rome, banquets were where alliances were forged and rivalries softened, all under the guise of camaraderie and copious amounts of wine. It was a high-stakes game of culinary chess, where each dish was a move designed to impress or intimidate. The more lavish the feast, the more likely your guests would leave singing your praises, or at least willing to support your latest political venture. Let's not forget entertainment. No senator worth their salt would host a dinner without some form of spectacle. Musicians, dancers, and even philosophers were paraded out to keep the guests entertained. Consider it the ancient equivalent of hiring a top-tier DJ for your party, minus the laser lights and glow sticks. Yet, while the allure of these banquets might make you dream of the past with rose-tinted glasses, the reality was far less glamorous. Behind every perfectly roasted boar was a kitchen staff working like slaves, because they often were, to make sure everything was just right. The social grease that kept the wheels of Roman politics turning was often the sweat of those who had no choice but to serve. Next, let's wander over to the gladiatorial games, the ancient precursor to your favorite sports league, albeit with a touch more blood. For a senator, sponsoring a game wasn't just about the thrill of combat. It was about showing the masses you cared. Bread and circuses, they called it, and throwing games was a way to curry favor with the plebeians who filled the stands. The games were a spectacle like no other. Picture this, a roaring coliseum, spectators on the edge of their seats, all eyes on the arena. Gladiators fought not just for survival but for glory, while beasts from across the empire, lions, leopards, and bears, were pitted against each other in a display of raw power. For the audience, it was a chance to escape daily drudgery. For you, a senator, it was an investment in public goodwill. But let's bust the myth of the noble gladiator while we're here. Sure, Hollywood spins tales of honorable warriors, but the truth was a touch grimmer. Most gladiators were slaves, prisoners, or condemned criminals. Their lives were short, brutal, and all too often expendable. The glory of the games came at a high human cost, one that was all too easy for the cheering crowds to overlook. From gladiators to the more genteel public baths, Rome had a knack for turning leisure into a social art form. These baths were the ancient world's answer to the local coffee shop, places to relax, gossip, and network. For a senator, a visit to the baths wasn't just about hygiene. It was a chance to rub shoulders, and perhaps more with Rome's elite. The baths were a wonder of engineering, featuring hot, warm, and cold pools. Imagine a steamy sauna followed by a refreshing dip, all while discussing the latest political scandal or real estate opportunity. Entry was often free or subsidized, courtesy of some senator seeking to boost their popularity. After all, what better way to win hearts than through a bit of public philanthropy? Yet, as with all things Roman, there's a darker underside. The baths, while open to all classes, were a microcosm of the city's social hierarchy. Slaves and freedmen might share the same water as senators, but make no mistake, everyone knew their place. And the gossip that flowed as freely as the water. It was as much a weapon as any sword, capable of making or breaking reputations. In this teeming metropolis, public appearances weren't just for show. They were a strategic maneuver. Every encounter was an opportunity to learn, to influence, or to subtly undermine a rival. In a city where rumors spread faster than wildfire in the Suburra, your reputation was everything. One wrong move, one misspoken word, and your carefully constructed image could crumble. So, dear Senator, as you navigate this labyrinth of feasts, fights, and baths, remember, the social stage is as treacherous as the political arena. Each banquet, each game, each steamy conversation is a step on the tightrope of Roman life. Balancing these aspects was not merely a matter of survival. It was the essence of living in the eternal city. And while this dance might seem dizzying, for those who mastered it, the rewards were as rich as the banquets they hosted. The social saga of Rome continues, and you wouldn't want to miss the next act. As the social saga of Rome unfolds, the political stage is set for its most dramatic act yet, the transformation from republic to empire. The curtain rises on a scene of chaos and ambition, with senators scrambling to find their footing in a world where the rules they knew are being rewritten faster than you can say, Veni, Vidi, Vici. Enter Julius Caesar, stage left, with a flair for the dramatic and a knack for turning the Roman Republic on its head. Let's talk about Caesar, a man whose name still echoes through history like a well-delivered punchline. Born in 100 BC into a patrician family, Caesar wasn't just content with the standard senatorial climb up the cursus honorum. No, he had his sights set on a bigger prize, absolute power. By 49 BC, he had crossed the Rubicon with his legions, a move so bold it's become synonymous with point-of-no-return decisions. The Senate, caught with its proverbial toga down, was left reeling as Caesar swept into Rome, effectively ending the Republic's democratic charade. Caesar's rise was a masterclass in political maneuvering, but let's not romanticize it too much. The reality was less noble statesman and more ruthless power player. Sure, he enacted reforms that benefited the common folk, like debt cancellation and land redistribution. But he also stacked the Senate with his own supporters, inflating its numbers to around 900 members, more sycophants than statesmen. It was less about democratic debate and more about ensuring his decrees sailed through unchallenged. The myth of Caesar as a benevolent dictator is tempting, but let's face it, he was as Machiavellian as they come. His assassination on the Ides of March, 44 BC, was a stark reminder that even the most powerful could fall victim to Rome's cutthroat politics. Brutus and Cassius, those not-so-loyal senators, didn't just stab him in the back. They attempted to restore the Republic by thrusting Rome into chaos. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. With Caesar out of the picture, Rome was a political powder keg waiting for a spark. Enter Augustus, the artist formerly known as Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir. If Caesar was the tempest that rocked the boat, Augustus was the shrewd captain who righted the ship, and then claimed it for himself. By 27 BC, he'd outmaneuvered rivals like Mark Antony and Cleopatra, consolidating power under the thin veil of restoring the Republic. Augustus was a PR genius, branding himself as the first among equals while wielding absolute authority. He reduced the Senate's power without abolishing it, dismissing some senators, welcoming others, and keeping the body as a ceremonial relic of its former glory. In reality, the Senate was now more of a rubber stamp than a governing body. Augustus had mastered the art of illusion, giving Romans the facade of a republic while tightening his imperial grip. The transformation from republic to empire wasn't just a political shift, it was a seismic change in the Roman psyche. Senators who thrived under the old system had to adapt or perish. Some embraced the new order, currying favor with Augustus and his successors. Others, like the Stoic philosopher Seneca, navigated these treacherous waters with caution, using their wit to survive in a world where speaking out could be hazardous to their health. But let's debunk the myth of Rome's golden age under the emperors as a time of universal prosperity and peace. Sure, the Pax Romana brought relative stability, but it was also a period of rampant inequality and autocratic rule. The Senate, once the heartbeat of Roman politics, was relegated to the sidelines. Its power diminished, its voice a mere echo of its former self. The senators had become spectators in a theater of imperial power, where the emperor was both director and star. The enduring myth of the Roman Senate as a bastion of noble ideals is tempting, but reality paints a grimmer picture. Power was centralized, and dissent was often met with exile or execution. Yet, despite this oppressive atmosphere, or perhaps because of it, the Senate found ways to adapt. Senators shifted from lawmakers to patrons, patrons to strategists, finding relevance in an ever-changing landscape. As for the legacy of the Roman Republic and its senators, it's a tale as compelling as any epic. The Republic may have fallen, but its principles, debate, rhetoric, civic duty, left indelible marks on Western political thought. The legend of Rome continues to captivate, but let's not forget the gritty reality beneath the marble facade. It was a world of power plays and political machinations, where survival often meant bending the rules rather than breaking them. So, as we close the final act of this Roman drama, remember that history is a tapestry of myths and realities. woven together in a story that's as much about human nature as it is about empires and emperors. The Roman Senate, in all its glory and folly, remains a testament to the complexities of power and the enduring struggle to balance ambition with ideals. In the grand theater of history, the show must go on, and though the Roman Republic took its final bow, its spirit lingers, a reminder that even in the harshest of realities, the dream of democracy and the pursuit of power continue to captivate and confound. As you drift into dreams of ancient Rome, ponder this. In the ever-rolling wheel of history, what role would you play? All right, so you've decided to embark on the career path of a medieval blacksmith. Good choice if you're into long hours, intense heat, and a complete lack of modern safety standards. Welcome to the 14th century, where your daily grind involves more actual grinding than most modern desk jobs will ever know. Forget the romanticized image of a rugged artisan forging swords with poetic flair. This is more like the Ninth Eternal of medieval trades. You're going to need every ounce of grit and resilience as you dive into this fiery world. You start your day before the rooster even thinks about crowing. By dawn, you're already stoking the embers of your forge, which will be the hardest place in town, literally. The forge is the heart of your workspace, a blazing beast that demands respect. It's fueled by charcoal, a precious commodity made from hardwood, and you'll need a steady supply to keep the fires burning. A ton of charcoal, about 1,000 kilograms, might set you back 3 to 5 shillings, depending on the local economy and whether you know a guy who knows a guy. And don't even get me started on the cost of iron. You're looking at roughly 2 to 3 shillings per hundredweight. Money doesn't grow on trees, but apparently charcoal does. Your toolkit is a blacksmith's pride and joy. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a high-tech gadget collection. You've got your hammer, anvil, tongs, and bellows, not to mention assorted chisels and files. Each tool has its own personality, and they all play a part in shaping raw metal into something useful or occasionally beautiful. The hammer is your main squeeze, an extension of your arm that delivers the kind of force that would make a modern power tool blush. The anvil, your trusty sidekick, weighs in at a hefty 200 pounds or more. It's not going anywhere, which is good because you'll be relying on it to support your heavy-handed artistry. Now, blacksmithing isn't just about banging on metal until it looks like a horseshoe. There's a sophisticated dance between heat and hammering. Too cold, and the iron is stubborn, refusing to bend. Too hot, and it's like trying to shape a blob of molten lava. You're aiming for that sweet spot, somewhere in the fiery orange to yellow range, about 500 to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit if you enjoy living dangerously without a thermometer. This is where your skill truly shines, or sweats, as the case may be. Speaking of sweat, let's talk about working conditions. You're in a dimly lit, smoky environment where the air is a cocktail of charcoal, metal, and the sweet scent of your own toil. Forget about OSHA. There's no hard hat or safety goggles here, just the occasional leather apron if you're lucky. Burns, blisters, and the odd flying spark are just part of the job. And if you've got delicate lungs, well, medieval life isn't really known for its healthcare plans. But let's not overlook the economics of your smithy. Making a decent living requires more than just muscle. You're a business owner in a feudal economy, which means juggling costs and negotiating with both peasants and nobility. A well-made horseshoe might fetch you a solid penny or two. A custom sword for a local knight could be your ticket to a more comfortable winter. The going rate for a simple plowshare, around 6 pence. Not bad if you can churn them out quickly. And don't forget the inevitable bartering. Sometimes it's easier to trade your wares for grain or livestock than to chase after coin. Being a blacksmith also means you're at the center of the community's practical needs. Everyone from farmers to warriors relies on your skills. Need to till the earth. You've got the plows. Need to defend the realm. Swords and armor at your service. Even the humble nail, essential for building everything from barns to cathedrals, starts life as a glowing rod on your anvil. Your work literally holds society together, and while that doesn't always translate to piles of cash, it does grant you a certain status. Maybe not as glamorous as a knight, but without you, they wouldn't have the armor to strut around in. Despite the tough conditions, there's a certain rhythm to the workday that's almost hypnotic. The clanging of metal on metal, the roar of the fire, the steady whoosh of the bellows. It's a symphony of industry. You lose yourself in the process, each strike of the hammer bringing you closer to the final product, each day a step toward mastering your craft. Sure, it's hard work, but there's a deep satisfaction in creating something tangible, something that will last for generations, or at least until the next battle or harvest. So here you are, a medieval blacksmith at the top of your game. You may not have a cushy office or a corner suite, but your skills are essential, your work respected, and your days anything but boring. And while you might fantasize about the glamorous life of a knight or a noble, you know that in the grand tapestry of medieval society, your role is as vital as the very iron you shape. So, while you're hammering away, let's chat about where you stand in the grand feudal scheme. Spoiler alert, you're not polishing your armor for the jousting tourney, but you're not mucking out stables either. Welcome to the medieval middle class, where you're more likely to be negotiating your next batch of iron than swearing fealty to a lord. Your life as a blacksmith is smack dab in the center of this social pyramid, and let's face it, that's not a bad place to be. You see, in the feudal world, everything's about who you serve and who serves you. At the top, you've got the king and his entourage of nobles, the ones who own all the land and make all the rules. Down at the bottom, you have the serfs, who are basically the medieval version of an overworked intern. No pay, lots of toil, and no weekends off. And there you are, nestled somewhere in the middle, wielding your hammer and keeping society's wheels turning, quite literally. But don't get too comfortable. Your status isn't just a comfy cushion in the social hierarchy. It's a tightrope walk between autonomy and obligation. Sure, you're not tied to the land like those serfs, and you're free to move around at least a little. But you're also not a free agent. Enter the guilds, your medieval trade union, social club, and regulatory body all rolled into one. These guilds are the gatekeepers of your profession, determining who can swing a hammer and who can't. They set the rules, from the quality of your wares to the prices you can charge. Think of them as the medieval Yelp, but with a lot more power over your livelihood. Joining a guild isn't a casual affair. It's like pledging to a fraternity, but with fewer toga parties and more hammering. You've got to serve an apprenticeship, usually around 7 years, give or take, under a master blacksmith before you can even think about setting up your own shop. Once you've proven your mettle, pun intended, you can graduate to journeyman status, and eventually the coveted title of master. But remember, with great power comes great responsibility, or at least more taxes and guild dues. Now, let's talk about autonomy. While the guilds keep a close eye on your business, you do have some wiggle room. Unlike those poor serfs, you can choose your clientele, and if you're savvy, you might even negotiate a contract with the local lord or monastery. But don't get too high on your horse, because there's always another blacksmith eyeing your territory, ready to swoop in with a better deal or a sharper sword. It's a dog-eat-dog world, or more accurately, a smith-eat-smith world. Speaking of swords, did you really make weapons for kings? Well, let's put those myths to the test. The romantic image of a blacksmith crafting Excalibur for King Arthur might make for a good story, but the reality is a bit more mundane. Sure, you might have hammered out a few swords in your time, but they're more likely to end up in the hands of local knights or mercenaries than a royal entourage. The high-end weaponry, the stuff fit for kings, was often crafted by specialized armorers working for noble patrons. You, my friend, are more likely making the tools of war that keep the common soldiers armed and dangerous. But don't sell yourself short. In the grand scheme of medieval warfare, every sword, lance, and arrow was vital. Without you, those knights in shining armor would be just knights in slightly less shiny pajamas. Your work might not earn you a place at the king's table, but it does give you a certain prestige. After all, you're keeping the kingdom's defenders equipped, one burnished blade at a time. Now, if you're imagining blacksmiths as these romantic, solitary figures shaping the fate of kingdoms with every swing of the hammer, let's dial that back a notch. Your daily grind is less about destiny and more about supply and demand. You're making horseshoes, nails, and the occasional plowshare to keep the local economy ticking. And while you might dream of forging legendary weapons, chances are you're more focused on meeting your weekly quota and keeping your clients happy, or at least not angry enough to switch to your competitor down the road. While we're myth-busting, let's tackle another common trope: the blacksmith as the ultimate loner, isolated in his smoky forge. The reality: think more community linchpin than lone wolf. Your shop is the beating heart of the village economy, a bustling hub where peasants, knights, and merchants converge to barter, bicker, and do business. You're not just a craftsman, you're a connector of people, a vital cog in the social machine. Sure, it's not all glamour. Your days are long, your work is hard, and your profits are modest. But there's a certain satisfaction in knowing that you're indispensable, that your skills keep society functioning, come war or peace. And while you might not be a knight in shining armor, you're the one making sure they have armor to shine in the first place. So there you have it, the life of a medieval blacksmith, caught between the anvil and the feudal system. You might not be living a fairy tale, but you're certainly shaping history, one red-hot iron bar at a time. Keep your hammer handy, your forge burning, and your wits sharp. Because in this world, the only constant is change, and you never know when the next opportunity or challenge will strike. So, speaking of opportunities, let's talk about the social web you're spinning as a medieval blacksmith. You're not just hammering out tools for the local farmers and knights. You're weaving a network of connections that could make or break your business. It's like LinkedIn, but with more soot and fewer endorsements. Your reputation, priceless. Your Rolodex, well, more like a mental list of who's who in the village, but you get the idea. First up, let's address your relationship with the local lord. Think of it as the ultimate medieval influencer partnership. The lord owns the land, and in many ways your livelihood. A good relationship with him could mean regular commissions for weapons or repairs on his estate, your bread and butter, or rather, your daily gruel. But don't be fooled into thinking this is a one-sided affair. The lord needs you just as much as you need him. Without your skills, his estate would crumble faster than a stale biscuit. And oh, the nuance of these interactions. It's not just a business transaction, it's a delicate dance of favors and obligations. You might supply the lord with a new set of horseshoes, and in return, he might throw in a few extra sacks of grain come harvest time. It's all about keeping each other happy, your medieval version of a 5-star review. You scratch his back, he scratches yours, and hopefully nobody gets too many splinters. But let's not forget your fellow craftsmen. Yep, in this world, competition is as fierce as a blacksmith's grip on his hammer. The guild might regulate who can set up sharp, but that doesn't mean everyone's cozying up by the fire sharing trade secrets. Oh no, it's more like a game of chess, strategic alliances, whispered deals, and the occasional checkmate when you undercut the guy down the street. You see, collaboration can be key. Maybe the cobbler down the road needs a new set of tools, and in exchange, he'll repair your boots when they've seen one too many puddles. Or perhaps you team up with the carpenter to create a new plow design that'll make the local farmers sing your praises. It's all about spotting the right opportunities and knowing when to lend a hand or a hammer. Now, about that currency situation. In a medieval economy, cash isn't always king. Coins are scarce and often hoarded, so what's a blacksmith to do? Enter the barter system, where goods and services are traded like hot stocks at a medieval Wall Street. Need some fresh produce. Trade a few nails for a bushel of apples. Need a new cloak. Maybe that farmer's wife wouldn't mind a new set of iron parts in exchange for her handiwork. It's a world where your skills are your currency, and the more versatile they are, the richer you become. But here's the catch. Reputation is everything. A single shoddy product or a sour deal could tarnish your name faster than you can say, rusty sword. Word travels fast in a small village, and your business's success hinges on trust and quality. It's a high-stakes game of reputation management, where every transaction is a chance to bolster or batter your standing in the community. And let's not overlook the social gatherings. Yes, even blacksmiths need a little downtime. Whether it's a feast at the Lord's Manor or a gathering at the local tavern, these are prime opportunities to network, swap stories, and maybe even secure your next big commission. It's not just about who you know, it's about who knows you and what they're saying when your back is turned. Speaking of which, let's debunk the myth of the solitary blacksmith. You're not some lone wolf forging away in isolation, but part of a bustling community network. Your shop is a hub of activity, where people come not just for your wares, but for news, gossip, and maybe a bit of advice. You're a craftsman, sure, but also a confidant, a counselor, and sometimes the village's unofficial news anchor. In the end, being a blacksmith is as much about people's skills as it is about hammering skills. Your ability to navigate the social maze of medieval life can be just as vital as your craftsmanship. So keep those connections strong, your reputation spotless, and your hammer ready. Because in this world, the only thing more valuable than iron is the trust and respect of your peers. As you stoke the forge and prepare to shape another piece of metal, Let's delve into the nitty-gritty of your craft. Here in the dim glow of your workspace, you aren't just a blacksmith. You're a medieval engineer, a problem solver of the highest order. Forget the idea of a blacksmith as a mere brawny figure swinging a hammer. You're the original innovator, the Steve Jobs of the 14th century, minus the turtleneck, and with a lot more soot. First up, the humble nail. Yes, it might seem mundane, but this little piece of metal was a marvel of medieval mass production. You're cranking out these essential fasteners by the hundreds, each one taking about a minute to forge. You start with a rod of iron, heat it until it's glowing like a sunset, and then hammer it into shape with a precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker blush. At about 500 degrees Fahrenheit, it's hot enough to reshape, but still manageable. Once you've got the rod tapered to a point, you cut it to length, form the head, and voila, a nail that could hold together anything from a peasant's house to a lord's manor. Now, let's shift our gaze to something a bit more glamorous, armor. Crafting a suit of armor isn't just about protection, it's about prestige and showing off your technical prowess. The process is a symphony of metallurgy and mechanics, requiring you to transform sheets of iron into articulated pieces that fit together like a medieval jigsaw puzzle. Each piece needs to be both strong and flexible, a balance achieved through tempering, a process that involves heating the metal to a precise temperature and then cooling it rapidly. Get the temperature wrong, and you might as well be making tin foil for all the good it'll do on the battlefield. Of course, the piece de resistance of any blacksmith's repertoire is the sword. Ah, the sword, the quintessential symbol of knighthood, the subject of countless legends and myths. Before you imagine yourself as some mystical forger of Excalibur, let's cut through the fog of fantasy. Sword-making was more about science than sorcery. You're dealing with steel, an alloy of iron and carbon, which means understanding the precise alchemy of materials. Too much carbon, and the blade becomes brittle. Too little, and it's too soft. The sweet spot, about 6 to 0. 8% carbon content, a detail that's as crucial as it is invisible. And then there's the crafting process. First, you forge the blade, a painstaking task that involves repeatedly heating and hammering the metal to align its internal structure. This is followed by quenching, where the blade is cooled in water or oil to set its shape. But don't be fooled by the medieval equivalent of a bath bomb. Quenching is where things can go horribly wrong. Cool it too quickly, and the blade might crack. Too slowly, and it won't hold its edge. Finally, you temper the blade, reheating it to a lower temperature to relieve internal stresses and improve its toughness. But let's not forget the environmental impact of your work. Yes, even in the Middle Ages, the seeds of ecological concern were being sown, albeit subconsciously. Your forge is powered by charcoal, which means deforestation is a constant companion. You're burning through roughly 1,000 kilograms of charcoal for every ton of iron you produce, leading to a landscape scarred by the demands of industry. Entire forests were felled to keep the fires burning, a medieval version of our modern carbon footprint. Talk about a Pyrrhic victory. Despite these challenges, innovation is the name of the game. Take the blast furnace, a technological leap forward that emerged in the late Middle Ages. By increasing airflow with stronger bellows, these furnaces could achieve higher temperatures, allowing for the production of cast iron. Sure, cast iron was more brittle than wrought iron, but it opened up new possibilities for mass production and complex shapes, making it the medieval equivalent of discovering plastic. And what about the myth of the magic sword? The idea that a blacksmith could imbue a blade with supernatural qualities is more fiction than fact. In reality, the magic was in the skill and knowledge required to blend materials and control processes with precision. While tales of enchanted swords make for great storytelling, the true enchantment lay in the ability to take raw elements of earth and fire and transform them into tools of war and peace. As you hammer away, consider the blacksmith's role as both creator and conservationist, balancing the demands of progress with the limitations of nature. Each clang of the hammer isn't just a step toward a finished product. It's an echo of the ongoing dance between human ambition and environmental consequence. So keep your tools sharp and your wits sharper, because in this ever-changing world, the only constant is the heat of the forge and the next challenge waiting to be forged. So, while your hammer sings its ancient song, remember that you're not just shaping metal, you're crafting the future, one painstaking detail at a time. And as you pause to wipe the sweat from your brow, take a moment to appreciate the legacy you're leaving. A world reshaped by the ingenuity of those who dared to dream beyond the anvil. As you pause to wipe the sweat from your brow, take a moment to appreciate the legacy you're leaving. A world reshaped by the ingenuity of those who dared to dream beyond the anvil. And speaking of legacy, let's hammer home the lasting impact medieval blacksmiths had on our modern world. Sure, it might not have had LinkedIn profiles or Twitter followings, but these soot-covered artisans were the original influencers of their age, shaping technology and culture in ways that still resonate today. First, let's talk technology. The advancements blacksmiths made in metalworking were nothing short of revolutionary. They were the unsung architects of the Industrial Revolution long before steam engines puffed their first clouds. By mastering techniques like tempering and quenching, they laid the groundwork for everything from railroads to skyscrapers. Those anvils and hammers were the 14th century version of a tech startup's garage, where innovation and elbow grease transformed the mundane into the monumental. The blacksmith's role in the evolution of warfare cannot be overstated. They were the original defense contractors, crafting the swords, armor, and siege weapons that determined the fates of kingdoms. Imagine trying to win a medieval battle armed only with sharpened sticks. Without blacksmiths, knights would have been little more than well-dressed targets. And while the knight in shining armor might have been the rock star of the battlefield, it was the blacksmith's skill that provided the instruments. Economically, blacksmiths were the backbone of the medieval economy, turning raw materials into goods that powered trade and commerce. Their ability to transform iron into everything from nails to plowshares meant they were pivotal players in the agricultural and construction sectors. Talk about a diversified portfolio. And let's not forget their entrepreneurial spirit, bartering goods and services like a medieval Wall Street. In a world where currency was often scarce, blacksmiths demonstrated that sometimes it's not what you know, but what you can trade. But were they heroes, or just another cog in the feudal machine? The truth, as always, is somewhere in between. Yes, they were bound by guilds and subjected to the whims of lords and nobles. Yet their skill and labor were indispensable, granting them a unique position within the social hierarchy. They might not have been the power brokers, but they were certainly the power makers, literally and figuratively. In a society that revolved around land and labor, blacksmiths were the linchpins, holding it all together with iron and sweat. Let's not overlook their cultural impact either. The blacksmith's forge was often the heart of a community, a place where news was shared, disputes settled, and legends were born. They were the unsung scribes of metal, recording the stories of their times in the tools and weapons they crafted. Their legacy lives are not just in the artifacts they left behind, but in the very idea of craftsmanship, an enduring reminder that skill and dedication can transform the elemental into the extraordinary. As the sparks flew from their forges, they ignited the kind of creativity and innovation that would eventually lead to the Renaissance. The blacksmith's legacy is a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of progress. While they might not have been wielding Excalibur, they were certainly forging the future one hammer strike at a time. So, next time you admire a piece of ironwork or benefit from the fruits of industrialization, spare a thought for those medieval artisans. They were the unsung heroes, the quiet revolutionaries who shaped the world with fire and force. They didn't just work metal, they worked magic, turning the raw into the remarkable, the ordinary into the extraordinary. In the grand tapestry of history, their legacy is woven with iron threads that continue to support the fabric of our modern world. In the end, the story of the medieval blacksmith is one of resilience, innovation, and a relentless drive to improve the world around them. It's a reminder that even in the most challenging of circumstances, human creativity and determination can forge a brighter future. So, keep your hammer ready and your heart steadfast, because like those blacksmiths of old, you too have the power to shape the world in ways you might never imagine. And with that, let the anvils rest and the fires cool, until the next spark of inspiration calls us back to the forge. In the grand tapestry of England's history, where swords clashed and crowns were as slippery as a buttered eel, Richard Roman III's early life unravels like a medieval soap opera. Born on October 2, 1452, in Fotheringhay Castle, Richard was the 12th child of Richard, Duke of York, and Cecily Neville. That's right, 12. You could say that getting attention in such a crowded household required either a remarkable talent or a penchant for drama. Richard, as history would have it, opted for both. Now, the 15th century in England wasn't exactly a peaceful stroll through the Shire. It was more like a series of political fistfights known as the Wars of the Roses. These were essentially family squabbles on steroids. The House of Lancaster, represented by a red rose, versus the House of York, flaunting a white one. The stakes, the English throne, the excitement level, somewhere between a Shakespearean tragedy and a modern-day reality TV show. Richard's father, the Duke of York, had a pretty solid claim to the throne, which, unsurprisingly, made him as popular as a tax collector at a party. Despite his pedigree, Daddy York's ambitions led to a rather unfortunate end at the Battle of Wakefield in 1460, where he was not only defeated, but to add insult to fatality, his head was displayed on a pike. Talk about a bad day at the office. Young Richard, just 8 years old at the time, suddenly found himself in the thick of this royal rumble. But don't let his tender age fool you. Even back then, Richard was as slippery as an eel in a barrel of oil. He was shipped off to the Low Countries to avoid any Lancastrian mischief, and later fostered by the Earl of Warwick, known as the Kingmaker. Warwick was the medieval equivalent of a talent scout, and he saw potential in the young Richard. It was like having your own personal Yoda, but with more armor and fewer cryptic phrases. As Richard grew, he was a bit of a political chameleon, adapting to the ever-shifting landscape of power. His brother, Edward Roman IV, managed to snatch the throne in 1461, making Richard the Duke of Gloucester at the tender age of 9. In case you're keeping score, that's a pretty impressive title for someone who hadn't even hit double digits. While other kids were worried about schoolyard bullies, Richard was dealing with the complexities of nobility and land ownership. Richard's early years were spent learning the art of governance and warfare, skills that would later make him one of England's most controversial monarchs. By 1469, he was knee-deep in his brother's military campaigns, a teenage commander proving his mettle on the battlefield. Meanwhile, the familial drama continued. Edward Roman IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville, a commoner with more ambition than a squirrel in a nut factory, caused a rift with Warwick, the Kingmaker. You see, Warwick had plans for Edward to marry a French princess, but Edward, ever the romantic, had other ideas. This dynastic drama was the medieval precursor to a tabloid scandal. Warwick, feeling betrayed, switched sides to support the Lancastrians, briefly dethroning Edward Roman IV in 1470. But this wasn't Richard's first rodeo. He stayed loyal to his brother, and the Yorks were back in power by 1471 after a series of battles, including the bloody encounter at Tewkesbury. The Lancastrian heir, Prince Edward, didn't make it out alive, leaving Henry VI vulnerable. Henry was conveniently found dead in the Tower of London shortly after, which historians suspect was less about natural causes and more about a dagger. Amidst this chaos, Richard was proving to be a shrewd operator. He was granted vast lands in the north of England, making him one of the most powerful lords in the realm. It was like winning the medieval lottery, except instead of cash you got castles and villagers who occasionally revolted. Richard was known for his administrative skills and fairness, gaining respect among the northern folk. His reputation was rising faster than a loaf of bread in an oven. Now, a quick detour into the personal life of a medieval noble. Richard married Anne Neville, Warwick's daughter, in 1472. Anne had been married to the late Lancastrian prince, which made her quite the political pawn. But this wasn't just a marriage of convenience. It was also a strategic alliance, consolidating Richard's power and wealth. Together, they had one son, Edward of Middleham, securing Richard's legacy, or so he thought. With Edward Roman IV firmly back on the throne, the Yorkist grip seemed secure. But this is the Wars of the Roses we're talking about, where stability was as rare as a unicorn sighting. Behind the scenes, Richard was sharpening his political acumen, navigating court intrigues and rivalries that could make Machiavelli blush. Edward Roman IV's death in 1483 threw a spanner in the royal works. His heir, Edward V, was just 12, and here's where things get juicy. Richard was named Lord Protector for his nephew, but his protective instincts soon took a rather sinister turn. The young king and his brother were lodged in the Tower of London, ostensibly for their protection. But as we know, the tower was less of a safe haven and more of a medieval version of Alcatraz. The princes disappeared, and while the finger-pointing has been going on for over 5 centuries, Richard was crowned king in June 1483. Convenient, right? Richard's path to the throne was anything but straightforward. It was a masterclass in opportunistic maneuvering, familial betrayal, and a healthy dose of medieval skullduggery. The Wars of the Roses had set the stage for Richard's ascent, a turbulent saga where alliances shifted quicker than the English weather. And while he wore the crown, whispers of his involvement in the prince's disappearance lingered like a persistent cloud over his reign. As we delve further into Richard's life, remember that history is written by the victors, and Richard's story is often clouded by the Tudor spin machine. But whether you see him as a villain or a victim of circumstance, there's no denying that Richard Roman III lived in a time where the stakes were high, and the Game of Thrones was, well, the only game in town. So there Richard sat, freshly crowned, and surrounded by the kind of murmurings that would make a PR agent's head spin. Becoming king wasn't just a matter of slipping on a crown. It was a high-stakes balancing act with all the grace of juggling flaming swords. And Richard, bless his ambitious heart, was trying to be both a reformer and a ruler in a kingdom where the lines between friend and foe were muddier than the Thames on a rainy day. Let's chat about his policies for a moment. Richard was actually quite the reformer, believe it or not. In his short 2-year reign, he established the Court of Requests, which was meant to give the common folk a voice, a medieval heartline for grievances, if you will. He tried to make the legal system fairer, reducing the power of corrupt officials. But here's the kicker. While he was handing out justice like a medieval Judge Judy, his reputation was being shredded faster than a royal decree in a windstorm. You see, Richard's reputation was a casualty of circumstance and savvy propaganda. Enter the mystery of the princes in the Tower, a scandal so juicy it would make today's tabloids blush. Richard's nephews, Edward V and his brother Richard, Duke of York, were last seen playing hopscotch, or whatever young princes did back then, in the Tower of London. After that, poof, they vanished, leaving behind more questions than answers and a trail of conspiracy theories that would make a JFK enthusiast proud. The popular narrative, spun by the victorious Tudors, painted Richard as the medieval equivalent of a villain twirling his mustache. Did Richard eliminate his nephews to secure his throne, or was he merely the unluckiest uncle in the annals of history? Well, dear listeners, the jury's still out, and the evidence is as murky as a medieval soup. What's clear is this. The disappearance of the princes cast a long shadow over Richard's attempts at governance, giving his enemies all the ammunition they needed. But let's not forget the economic context of the time, a backdrop of financial strain that would make any ruler break out in a cold sweat. The Wars of the Roses had left England's coffers emptier than a beggar's bowl. Richard, ever the practical monarch, tried to address this by enforcing strict fiscal policies, tightening the royal belt, and even attempting to reform the tax system. However, his efforts were about as popular as a rainstorm at a summer fair. Nobles grumbled, and his attempts to stabilize the economy were overshadowed by the drama surrounding the crown. Richard Roman III's reign was also plagued by the kind of PR disasters that would give modern spin doctors nightmares. Take, for instance, his physical appearance. The Tudors, those masters of spin, portrayed Richard as a hunchbacked villain, a caricature that stuck like glue. Shakespeare, the Bard of Avon himself, immortalized this image, turning Richard into a pantomime villain for the ages. In reality, while Richard did have scoliosis, a fact confirmed by the discovery of his remains in 2012, he was far from the monstrous figure portrayed in Tudor propaganda. It's a classic case of history being written by the winners, with Richard's true image buried beneath layers of Tudor embellishment. In the north of England, however, things were a bit different. Richard was actually quite popular there, thanks to his efforts to promote fair governance and his knack for diplomacy. He was seen as a protector of the north, a man who understood their grievances and worked to address them. But regional popularity, as we know, doesn't always translate to national success, especially when the political winds were blowing hurricane-force gales against him. To add to his woes, Richard faced the threat of rebellion, most notably from Henry Tudor, a man with a claim to the throne that was as thin as a pauper's porridge. Tudor's claim rested on his mother, Margaret Beaufort, whose connection to the royal line was tenuous at best. But hey, in a game where thrones were the ultimate prize, even the flimsiest of claims could be spun into a tapestry of legitimacy. Richard knew that his throne was as stable as a three-legged stool, and he spent much of his reign preparing for the inevitable showdown with Tudor. Spoiler alert. This confrontation was as inevitable as a plot twist in a soap opera, destined to end on the bloody fields of Bosworth in 1485. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's still plenty of intrigue to unravel before that fateful day. Despite the turmoil, Richard's reign wasn't without its achievements. His attempts at legal reform, though overshadowed by scandal, laid some groundwork for future monarchs. He was a man who, under different circumstances, might have been remembered as a king who tried to do right by his people. Instead, he was caught in a web of political intrigue, familial betrayal, and bad PR that would make any modern politician empathize. The truth about Richard Roman III is that he was as complex as the times he lived in. His reign was a brief, tumultuous blip in the grand saga of English history, marked by ambition, reform, and controversy. As we continue to unravel the threads of his life and legacy, remember that history is rarely black and white. Richard's story is a vivid tapestry of grey, where myth and reality intertwine in a dance as old as time itself. And so we pick up with Richard Roman III, caught in a web of political intrigue and scandalous whispers, as if his life were penned by a medieval tabloid journalist. Now, let's dive into the infamous Battle of Bosworth Field, an event that would make even the most seasoned Game of Thrones fan gasp in astonishment. This wasn't just any battle. It was the climax of a decades-long saga of power, betrayal, and enough plot twists to keep a soap opera running for years. Picture this. The year is 1485, and Richard's throne is about as stable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake. Henry Tudor, the challenger with a claim to the throne that was about as convincing as a politician's promise, was making his move. And while Henry's claim might have been shaky, his strategic game was anything but. You see, Henry wasn't just relying on his distant royal bloodline. He had amassed an army of exiled English nobles, disenchanted Lancastrians, and a smattering of French mercenaries who, let's be honest, were probably just in it for the spoils. Richard, on the other hand, held the home court advantage, or so it seemed. His forces numbered around 10,000, a formidable army by any standards, while Henry's ragtag band barely scraped together 5,000. But here's the kicker. Richard's forces were rife with dissent and mistrust, a boiling pot of potential betrayal just waiting to spill over. The political landscape was shifting under his feet like quicksand, with key allies like Lord Stanley playing both sides like a medieval double agent. Now, let's talk about Richard's strategic blunders, because what's a historical downfall without a few epic missteps? First on the list was his decision to charge straight at Henry during the battle. It was a bold move, sure, but about as wise as bringing a knife to a cannon fight. Richard's cavalry charge was legendary, but it was also a Hail Mary pass in a game where the stakes were his crown and his life. Henry, ever the opportunist, had positioned his forces strategically, and as Richard's charge faltered, the tide of battle turned. But it wasn't just the battlefield where Richard's strategy fell apart. His lack of solid alliances was a critical error. The Stanleys, a powerful family with a foot in both camps, held back their forces until the last possible moment. When they finally made their move, it wasn't to Richard's aid. Instead, they sided with Henry, sealing Richard's fate with a betrayal worthy of the most dramatic Shakespearean tragedy. Fitting, given the bard's later portrayal of Richard as the ultimate villain. And so, on August 22, 1485, Richard Roman III became the last English king to die in battle. His death marked the end of the Plantagenet dynasty and the beginning of the Tudor era. But the battle's outcome was about more than just a change of regime. It was a masterclass in the brutal realities of medieval power struggles. Richard's body was unceremoniously stripped and displayed for all to see, a stark reminder of the merciless nature of political ambition. Now, let's turn to the role of Tudor propaganda in transforming Richard from ruler to villain. Henry Tudor, now Henry Roman VII, understood the power of narrative, and boy, did he have a story to sell. The Tudors spun Richard's defeat into a moral victory for the ages, painting him as a tyrant who got his just deserts. They enlisted the help of chroniclers, poets, and playwrights to craft a narrative that was half history, half myth, and all political savvy. The most famous of these storytellers, of course, was William Shakespeare. His play, Richard Roman III, immortalized the king as a hunchbacked villain, a Machiavellian schemer whose physical deformities mirrored his moral corruption. It's a portrayal that stuck like glue over the centuries, despite the fact that Richard's scoliosis was only confirmed centuries later when his remains were discovered under a Leicester parking lot in 2012. Talk about historical irony. But why was this portrayal so effective? Well, the Tudors were masters of spin, and they understood the power of a good story. By vilifying Richard, they legitimized their own rule, turning a questionable claim into a divine mandate. In a world where literacy was limited and word of mouth was king, the Tudors' narrative became the accepted truth, shaping public perception for generations. In reality, Richard was a complex figure, caught in a web of familial betrayal, political intrigue, and shifting allegiances. His attempts at reform and governance were overshadowed by the drama of his rise and fall. The Tudors' portrayal of him as a one-dimensional villain was a simplification, but one that served their purposes well. As we wrap up this chapter of Richard's story, it's clear that his downfall was a perfect storm of strategic blunders, political betrayal, and the power of narrative. History may be written by the victors, but in Richard's case, it was rewritten, embellished, and immortalized. The truth of his reign is buried beneath layers of myth and propaganda, a testament to the enduring power of storytelling in shaping our understanding of the past. And with that, dear listeners, we leave Richard Roman III on the bloody fields of Bosworth, a king whose legacy is as complex as the times he lived in. But fear not, for our journey through history is far from over. There's more to explore in the aftermath of Bosworth, as the Tudors set about remaking England in their image. So stay tuned as we continue to unravel the tangled web of England's past, where the stakes are high, and the stories are as rich and complex as the characters who live them. So here we are, standing in the aftermath of Bosworth Field, surrounded by the echoes of clashing swords and the unmistakable scent of freshly written history. As the dust settled over the battlefield, the Tudor dynasty rose from the figurative ashes of Richard Roman III's reign, ready to plaster over the past with their own brand of storytelling that would make even the most seasoned spin doctor nod in admiration. Let's not mince words. The newly minted Henry Roman VII was no fool. He knew that to cement his tenuous claim to the throne, he needed more than just a victory on the battlefield. He needed a narrative, a blockbuster with him as the hero and Richard Roman III as the pantomime villain. And so began one of the greatest rebranding campaigns in history, where the Tudors took Richard's image and twisted it like a medieval pretzel. First on the agenda was ensuring everyone and their grandmother knew Richard was the bad guy. Enter the hunchback myth, a piece of Tudor propaganda that stuck like a bad haircut. History tells us that Richard did indeed have scoliosis, but the Tudors, with a flourish of dramatic flair, turned this into a symbol of his supposed moral corruption. Shakespeare, ever the opportunist, ran with it, creating a character that audiences love to hate. It's as if the bard had a checklist. Villainous laughter, check. Devious plots, check. Physical deformity, check. In reality, Richard's condition was likely more of a nuisance than a defining trait. But hey, why let facts get in the way of a good story? Speaking of stories, let's talk about the Tudors' economic narrative. The Wars of the Roses had left England's treasury about as full as a student's fridge after finals. Barely a crumb to be found. Henry Roman VII, aware that an empty coffers could lead to rebellion faster than you could say tax hike, set about tightening the kingdom's purse strings. He implemented fiscal reforms, streamlined tax collection, and even married Elizabeth of York to unite the warring houses. This wasn't just a marriage of political convenience. It was a merger designed to stabilize the realm. The union was like pouring concrete over the cracks in a very shaky foundation, solid enough to prevent immediate collapse, but still prone to the occasional tremor. But let's not gloss over the fact that Henry's rise to power was as much about survival as it was about strategy. His reign had to be as much about consolidating power as it was about ruling. To that end, he established the Court of Star Chamber, a judicial offshoot that made sure nobility didn't get too comfortable with their own power. Think of it as the medieval version of having your emails scrutinized by HR. Uncomfortable, but effective at keeping everyone in line. As for the common folk, they were living through what must have felt like a perpetual game of musical thrones. The constant power shifts had left the lower classes weary and wary, their lives marked by the whims of nobility dueling for dominance. The Tudors promised stability, and in a world where yesterday's king could be tomorrow's trader, that was a currency more valuable than gold. But let's not kid ourselves. Stability came at a price. The Tudors were as heavy-handed as they were shrewd, and dissent was met with a swift and often brutal response. Now, if you're wondering how the Tudors managed to keep their grip on power, look no further than their mastery of myth-making. By presenting Richard as a tyrant whose defeat was a divine act of justice, they turned their rule into a moral imperative. The story stuck, not because it was entirely true, but because it resonated with a populace desperate for a return to order. The Tudors understood that a compelling narrative could be as powerful as an army of knights, and they wielded it with all the precision of a master swordsman. So where does this leave Richard Roman III? Well, somewhere between the truth and the Tudor tapestry lies a man trying to navigate a world where the stakes were as high as a tightrope walk over the Thames. His attempts at reform, while genuine, were overshadowed by the drama of his demise and the enduring power of a narrative crafted by those who followed. In the end, Richard's story serves as a reminder that in the Game of Thrones, the victor's pen can be mightier than the sword. But don't think for a moment that we're leaving Richard's legacy entirely behind. The Tudor era may have been born from his downfall, but they were hardly the last word on his story. As we continue our historical journey, we'll see how the seeds sown in Richard's time sprouted in unexpected ways, influencing the course of English history long after the Tudors had left the stage. So stick around, because this tale is far from over, and there are plenty more twists and turns to unearth in the saga of England's tumultuous past. And so, we delve into the revival of Richard Roman III, not just the king, but the man beneath the crown who history had almost left behind. Fast forward from the dust and drama of Bosworth Field to 2012, when archaeologists began digging up a parking lot in Leicester, looking for the foundations of the Greyfriars Friary. Spoiler alert, they found something a bit more royal than they'd bargained for. Beneath layers of asphalt and centuries of urban sprawl lay the remains of Richard Roman III, a discovery that would flip the script on his story once again. It was a eureka moment for history buffs, a chance to peel back the layers of Tudor propaganda. The skeleton was matched with a 999% certainty to Richard through mitochondrial DNA from a living descendant of his sister Anne of York. Yes, science had Richard's back, and it was about to give his story a 21st century makeover. The discovery of his remains was the kind of plot twist that makes you wonder if history itself has a sense of irony. Here was a king, maligned for centuries, unearthed in a place where the only royalty was the occasionally inflated parking fee. The skeleton revealed that Richard did indeed have scoliosis, his spine curved like a question mark. But here's the kicker. He wasn't the twisted hunchback of legend. Modern analysis determined that his condition was more of a cosmetic inconvenience than a debilitating deformity, debunking the Tudor portrayal. Richard was in his early 30s, stood around 5 foot 8 inches tall, pretty average for his time, and showed signs of having led a physically active life. That's right, folks. The villainous cripple image was more fiction than fact. It turns out that Shakespeare might have taken a few creative liberties. Who knew? But why all this renewed interest in a king whose reign was shorter than a season of your favorite Netflix drama? Well, Richard's exhumation sparked a re-evaluation of his legacy. For starters, it prompted historians and scientists to take a fresh look at the records, shedding light on the real man behind the myth. Richard's attempts at legal reform, such as the Court of Requests to help the common folk, began to be seen in a new light, not just as footnotes in history, but as genuine attempts to modernize a medieval system. The discovery also reignited debates about the infamous princes in the Tower, with some arguing that Richard's villainy was exaggerated to bolster Tudor legitimacy, while the prince's fate remains as elusive as ever. The new narrative painted Richard more as a victim of bad press than a Machiavellian monster. The victors may have written history, but Richard's remains were rewriting it back, challenging us to question long-held assumptions. And let's not forget the economic and social context of Richard's reign. The Wars of the Roses had left England's economy in tatters, and Richard's attempts to stabilize it, through reforms in land laws and attempts to curb corruption, were significant, even if overshadowed by political intrigue. These efforts show a ruler trying to adapt to the seismic shifts of his time, offering a glimpse into the practical challenges of medieval kingship beyond the battlefield. But perhaps the most powerful legacy of Richard Roman III is the way his story has fueled a modern fascination with reinterpreting the past. His reburial in Leicester Cathedral in 2015 turned into a media spectacle, drawing crowds and sparking renewed interest in a king whose life and death had been obscured by centuries of myth-making. It was a moment of poetic justice, a chance for Richard to finally rest with the dignity his tumultuous life had denied him. In the end, Richard Roman III's legacy is a testament to the enduring power of narrative. It reminds us that history is not a static record, but a living dialogue, shaped by those who tell it and those who listen. Richard's story, once a cautionary tale of tyranny, is now a narrative of re-evaluation, showing us that the past is never quite as settled as it seems. It's a reminder that beneath every legend lies a kernel of truth, waiting to be unearthed like a king in a parking lot. So, as we close the book on Richard Roman III, remember this. His story is more than a tale of power and downfall. It's a reflection of our own fascination with the past. It challenges us to look beyond the dominant narratives and question the stories we've been told. In doing so, we might just find a truth that resonates with our own time, where the lines between myth and reality are as blurred as ever. Richard may have lost his crown, but in the realm of historical intrigue, he remains a king. The sun seeps through the cracks of your humble longhouse, casting its golden glow on the wooden beams overhead. It's the year 900 AD, give or take a few, because record-keeping isn't exactly the Vikings' forte. You stretch out on your straw-filled mattress, ready to tackle another day as a shipbuilder in this bustling Norse settlement. If you think your 9-to-5 is demanding, try crafting a vessel that can withstand the North Sea's temper tantrums. Now, before you even think of picking up a tool, let's talk breakfast. A hearty meal is essential when your day involves heaving oak logs. You'll probably start with some barley porridge, maybe with a splash of milk if the cows have been cooperative. It's simple, but it gets the job done, much like your approach to shipbuilding. Speaking of shipbuilding, let's dive into the nitty-gritty. The material of choice, oak wood. Why oak, you ask? Well, it's tough, durable, and has this magical property of being naturally water-resistant. Perfect for long voyages, and more importantly, raids. But here's the catch. Oak doesn't come cheap or easy. It's the gold standard of shipbuilding materials, and that means it's in high demand and short supply. You can't just waltz into the forest and chop down a tree. You need the landowner's permission, which usually involves a bit of wheeling and dealing, or in some cases, a hefty bribe. Once you've got your oak, it's time to grab your tools. Iron nails are your bread and butter, but these are no ordinary nails. They're hand-forged and valuable, reflecting a significant portion of your investment. Iron isn't just lying around for free, after all. It's extracted from barg ore, a process that's labor-intensive and time-consuming. So every nail you hammer into those wooden planks is a small fortune. Now, let's talk social hierarchy, because, believe it or not, shipbuilding is more than just manual labor. Being a shipbuilder positions you somewhat favorably in the pecking order. You're not a jarl, but you're definitely a step above the average thrall. Ships are the lifeblood of Viking society. They're not just tools of war, but also symbols of power and prestige. So, when a jarl commissions a new longship, it's your craftsmanship that will be on display for the entire settlement to admire or critique. Economic implications. Oh, they're plentiful. A well-crafted ship can tip the scales of trade and warfare. It can open new trade routes, bring back exotic goods, or even lead a successful raid that fills the coffers of your community. No pressure, right? Your ability to produce reliable, seaworthy vessels directly impacts the settlement's prosperity, and by extension, your own status and wealth. It's a symbiotic relationship where everyone from the landowner to the blacksmith has a stake in your success. As you make your way to the workshop, you pass the bustling marketplace. It's a cacophony of traders haggling over everything from sheep to silk. You can't help but notice the foreign merchants and their exotic wares, a stark reminder of how interconnected Viking society is with the rest of the medieval world. This isn't just a collection of isolated villages, it's a society with far-reaching influence, thanks largely to the very ships you build. Arriving at the workshop, you're greeted by the familiar scent of sawdust and the clanging of metal on metal. Your apprentices are already hard at work, and you take a moment to appreciate the scene. This isn't just a day job, it's a craft passed down through generations. Each ship you build carries the legacy of those who came before you, and that's not something you take lightly. So there you are, standing amidst planks of oak, a hammer in one hand and a future masterpiece in your mind. It's a new day, full of challenges and possibilities. Today, you'll shape not just wood, but the destiny of your people. Get to work, Viking shipbuilder, the sea awaits. You roll up your sleeves, ready to dive into the gritty, sawdust-filled world of Viking shipbuilding. You're not just hammering wood together, you're orchestrating a symphony of craftsmanship. First on the agenda, the keel. The backbone of the ship, quite literally. This single piece of timber is the foundation upon which the entire vessel rests. A crooked keel means a wobbly ship, and nobody wants to be the laughingstock of the fjord, right? Vikings were precise, and not in the let's eyeball it kind of way. The keel needs to be straight as an arrow, because let's face it, the North Sea doesn't exactly offer smooth sailing. Now, here's a fact that might shatter your Hollywood-induced illusion of Vikings as brutish oafs hacking away with oversized axes. These folks had an eye for detail that would put a Swiss watchmaker to shame. It's all about the clinker-built method, where planks overlap each other like scales on a fish. Not only does this give the hull its graceful curve, but it also creates a flexible structure that can handle rough waters. And yes, this is where your hand-forged iron nails come in. They're driven into the overlapping planks with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. No room for error when your life depends on the sea not turning your masterpiece into a wooden submarine. But shipbuilding isn't a solo endeavor. It's a team sport, and you're the coach. Your apprentices, eager yet green, are learning the ropes, or rather, learning the rigging. They're the future of this craft, and you're their guide through this labyrinth of lumber and labor. It takes about 50 to 100 men to build a single longship over the span of 6 months. That's right, 6 months. This isn't a weekend DIY project. It's a marathon of sweat and skill. Apprenticeships are where boys become men, craftsmen, to be precise. They start with the basics, like shaping planks and learning to wield tools without losing a finger. Only the best make it to the big leagues, becoming master shipbuilders like yourself. And let's not forget the division of labor. It's not just about muscle, it's about specialization. You've got your sawyers, your carvers, and your blacksmiths, each with their own role in this wooden opera. The sawyers are the unsung heroes, turning logs into planks with a two-person saw that could double as a medieval torture device. Carvers then shape these planks with axes and adzes, tools that look like they belong in a medieval horror flick, but are essential for crafting the curved hulls that define a Viking longship. Then there's the mast, the crown jewel of your creation. It's not just a pole stuck in the middle of the ship. It's a meticulously crafted piece of engineering. Selecting the right tree is an art form in itself, tall, straight, and strong enough to withstand both the wind's fury and the weight of the sails. You'll spend as much time on the mast as you would on the rest of the ship, because without it, you're just paddling an oversized canoe. Now, let's talk economics because, believe it or not, every plank, nail, and rope has a price tag. A single longship can cost as much as 100 cattle, not exactly pocket change even by today's standards. The shipyard is the economic nerve center of your settlement, driving trade and warfare. Your ships are the medieval equivalent of a trade fleet and a navy rolled into one. They open up trade routes that stretch from Constantinople to Newfoundland. Yeah, the Vikings were global before it was cool. And what about the raiding? Those sleek hulls and sturdy masts aren't just for show. A successful raid can bring back silver, spices, and slaves, commodities that fuel the local economy and fill the longhouse coffers. Shipbuilding isn't just about craftsmanship. It's about power and prestige. It's about who controls the sea lanes, who dictates the flow of goods, and who gets to wear the fanciest cloak at the next thing assembly. Now, let's debunk that romantic notion of the lone Viking warrior sailing off into the sunset. These ships were community efforts, and everyone had skin in the game. From the thrall felling trees to the jarl financing the expedition, each longship was a testament to collective effort. It's easy to get swept up in the glory of Viking lore, but the reality is a complex web of social and economic interdependencies. So, next time you hear tales of Viking warriors cutting through the waves, remember the craftsmen behind the scenes. Those ships didn't just appear out of thin air. They were built with sweat, skill, and a little bit of Norse magic. As you stand back to admire the skeleton of your creation, you know you're not just building a ship. You're building an icon, a vessel that will carry your people into legend. But hey, no pressure. Now, pass the ale. Tomorrow we tackle the rigging. As the sun reaches its zenith, casting shadows that dance like the restless waves of the North Sea, you and your fellow shipbuilders take a well-deserved break. It's time to swap hammers for horns, of ale, that is, and gather round to chew the fat, both literally and figuratively. The midday respite is more than just a pause in the laborious rhythm of crafting a longship. It's a chance to dive into the cultural ocean that these vessels have carved into Viking life. Now, let's talk about the Viking longship, the star of countless sagas, and let's be honest, the subject of more romanticism than a Shakespearean sonnet. These ships weren't just transport. They were the very embodiment of Norse mythology and society. They were the chariots of the gods, the vessels that could traverse both the mortal and celestial realms. But before you get swept away by visions of Odin and his crew sailing off into the afterlife, let's anchor ourselves back to reality with some hard facts. Longships were indeed marvels of engineering, but they weren't magic carpets. They required serious manpower to operate. Think crews ranging from 40 to 60 burly Vikings, each as essential as the next. The sleek design of these ships, with their shallow drafts and symmetrical ends, allowed them to navigate both open seas and winding rivers. This made them perfect for the double life they led: trade, and of course, a bit of the old ultraviolence. They could slip into unsuspecting coastal villages at dawn and be gone by breakfast, leaving behind stunned villagers and empty granaries. But where does this romantic image of the lone Viking warrior come from? Blame it on the sagas, and more recently, Hollywood. The idea of a solitary hero cutting through the misty fjords is more fiction than fact. In reality, it was a community affair, a flotilla of interdependence. The ships were funded by local chieftains, built by skilled craftsmen like yourself, and manned by crews who had as much to gain from a successful voyage as the jarl who financed it. Let's talk mythology, shall we? These ships weren't just tools of the trade, they were vessels of the gods. According to Norse lore, the gods themselves had a ship, Skidbladnir, built by the dwarves and capable of being folded like a cloth. Now, wouldn't that be a handy trick for parking? While Skidbladnir might be a tad far-fetched, it does underscore the cultural reverence Vikings had for their ships. They were seen as living entities, with spirits that needed to be appeased, often through rituals and sacrifices. Some ships were even buried with their owners, a grand send-off to the afterlife. So, when you're next hammering in those precious iron nails, remember that you're not just constructing a ship, you're crafting a legacy. The romanticized image of Vikings as fearless explorers also has roots in reality, but with a few embellishments. Yes, they reached as far as North America, a good 5 centuries before Columbus decided to get lost and call it India. Their longships opened up trade routes stretching from the Byzantine Empire to the icy shores of Greenland. But let's not forget, these voyages were fraught with danger. Navigating by the stars and the sun without so much as a compass required not just bravery, but a healthy dose of recklessness. The North Atlantic isn't exactly known for its hospitality, and many a voyage ended in disaster rather than discovery. Yet, despite the perils, the allure of the sea was irresistible. The potential rewards of a successful raid or trade expedition were too great to ignore. Silver, spices, and slaves. These were the real treasures that filled the coffers and kept the longhouses warm during those harsh Nordic winters. And let's be real, nothing says, "I made it," like a shiny new brooch fashioned from Byzantine silver. The economic impetus behind these ships cannot be overstated. They were the engines of the Norse economy, the medieval equivalent of a high-risk, high-reward investment. But why does this romantic image persist? Perhaps it's the simplicity of a good story, a hero, a journey, and the unknown. Or maybe it's the enduring human fascination with adventure and the allure of the untamed frontier. In any case, The reality is that these ships were products of their time, shaped by the economic, social, and political currents of the Viking Age. They were symbols of power, prestige, and peril, a trifecta that continues to captivate our imaginations. As you sip your ale and listen to the tales spun by your fellow craftsmen, it's clear that the legacy of the Viking longship is as enduring as the oak from which it's hewn. It's a legacy of exploration, of cultural exchange, and yes, of conquest. But above all, it's a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of the people who built them. So, as the sun begins its slow descent, and you prepare to return to the laborious world of shipbuilding, remember this: you're not just crafting a vessel, you're shaping a piece of history. And while the myths may soar, it's the reality of your craftsmanship that will endure. Now, back to the grindstone, for the sea awaits, and it's not a patient master. As the sun begins its slow descent, and you prepare to return to the laborious world of shipbuilding, remember this: the sea may not be a patient master, but neither is the Jarl who commissioned this masterpiece. It's time to roll up those sleeves and dive back into the gritty details of your craft, starting with the piece de resistance of any Viking vessel, the dragon head carving. Now, before you start envisioning a Game of Thrones-style dragon breathing fire on the prow, let's clear up a common misconception. These dragon heads were less about scaring the bejesus out of distant lands and more about flexing some serious artistic muscle. Sure, they were meant to intimidate, but they also served as symbols of protection and prestige. A dragon head wasn't just a decorative flourish. It was a statement, a calling card that announced the ship's arrival long before the crew set foot on foreign soil. Craftsmanship here isn't just about aesthetics. Every curve and detail is deliberate, carved with a precision that would put most modern woodworkers to shame. The intricacies of these designs reflect not just artistic prowess, but also a deep connection to Norse mythology. Each dragon head is a nod to the gods, a tribute that says, we're not just sailors, we're descendants of Odin himself. And let's be honest, there's a touch of vanity involved, because who doesn't want to be the talk of the fjord with the flashiest ship in the water? Once the dragon head is attached, you turn your attention to waterproofing the hull, a task as essential as it is tedious. Forget your modern-day sealants and waterproof sprays. The Vikings had their own concoction, pine tar. Think of it as the medieval version of duct tape, cheap, effective, and a bit of a mess. Pine tar is this sticky, gooey substance that's slathered over the hull to keep the water out. It's smoky, it's pungent, and it'll ruin your clothes faster than a spilled horn of ale. But hey, it does the job. Here's where we get into the nitty-gritty of Viking economics. The choice of design elements and materials wasn't just about what looked good or worked well. It was a balancing act of cost, availability, and functionality. Pine tar was abundant and easy to make, but it required time and labor, resources that could be in short supply. The decision to use it wasn't just a practical one, it was economic. It's a reminder that shipbuilding was as much about ledger books as it was about craftsmanship. Every decision, from the wood to the dragon carvings, had to be weighed against the bottom line. Now, let's steer the conversation towards the environmental and trade factors that dictated where ships were built. Viking shipyards weren't plopped down at random. These locations were chosen with the precision of a naval strategist. The proximity to forests, for instance, was crucial. No trees, no ships. Imagine trekking miles just to find a decent oak. Not exactly a walk in the park, is it? So, shipyards were strategically placed near abundant resources, ensuring materials were close at hand. Trade routes also played a starring role in these decisions. The Vikings were the original globalists, long before the term became a political hot potato. A good shipyard wasn't just about building ships. It was about building connections. These hubs needed access to crucial waterways, not just for local trade, but for the vast networks that stretched from the icy coasts of Greenland to the bustling bazaars of Constantinople. The ships crafted here were the lifelines of these networks, the vehicles of cultural exchange and economic expansion. Speaking of trade, let's not forget the geopolitical chess game that these ships were part of. Each vessel wasn't just a tool for exploration or raiding. It was a pawn in a larger game of power and influence. The very design of Viking ships, with their shallow drafts and symmetrical ends, was a tactical choice, allowing them to slip into shallow rivers for trade, or, let's be honest, plunder. The flexibility of these ships made them perfect for the unpredictable waters of both politics and the North Sea. Let's pause for a moment to talk about the crew. Once the ship was seaworthy, it wasn't just left to gather barnacles until the next raid. No, these ships were a hive of activity, with crew members preparing for voyages that could last months. The meticulous care put into maintaining these vessels was nothing short of impressive. Sails had to be repaired, ropes replaced, and supplies stocked. Each task had to be done with an urgency that only a Viking winter could inspire. And here's where we debunk another myth: the idea that Viking ships were solely tools of war. In reality, they were multi-purpose marvels. Sure, they were used for raids, but they were also the backbone of trade expeditions, exploration missions, and even diplomatic voyages. They were the SUVs of the medieval world, versatile, reliable, and absolutely essential for survival. The economic implications of these vessels were vast. They facilitated trade, enabled exploration, and yes, even conquest. But they also connected communities, spread ideas, and built bridges across cultures. As the final touches are made, and the sun dips below the horizon, it strikes you that this ship is more than just a collection of wood and nails. It's a testament to the intricacies of Viking society, a symbol of their ingenuity and adaptability. It's a reflection of the delicate balance between myth and reality, a dance between the romanticized image of the Viking warrior and the gritty, practical realities of life in the Norse world. So, as you stand back and admire your handiwork, remember that this ship is a piece of history in the making. It's a vessel that will carry not just warriors, but the hopes and dreams of a people. And while the myths may soar, it's the reality of your craftsmanship that will endure. Tomorrow, the adventure continues, as the sea calls and the next chapter in this saga unfolds. As the ship finally stands completed in its full glory, you can't help but feel a rush of pride and exhaustion. It's not just the polished oak gleaming in the fading sunlight, or the dragon head prow casting long shadows on the shore. It's the culmination of countless hours, the communal sweat and skill of an entire village. This masterpiece, ready for its maiden voyage, is more than a mere vessel. It's a symbol of what a tightly knit community can achieve. Tomorrow, this ship will cut through the waves, but tonight, it cuts through the evening air as a testament to collaboration and craftsmanship. Now, let's take a step back and talk about the maiden voyage. This isn't just a test drive, it's a proving ground. The ship will need to demonstrate its seaworthiness, its speed, and its ability to handle the unpredictable tantrums of the North Sea. It's not just about whether the dragonhead will scare away sea monsters. Though, let's be honest, a bit of extra intimidation never hurt. It's about ensuring that this ship can carry its crew across vast distances, opening up new horizons for trade and discovery. Ah, trade and discovery, the twin pillars that make Viking shipbuilding more than just a local affair. These ships were the SUVs of the medieval world, capable of navigating both the high seas and the narrow rivers, connecting continents in ways that would make Marco Polo jealous. Their shallow drafts allowed them to venture up rivers, trading with inland communities, while their sturdy construction enabled them to brave the open ocean. From the bustling markets of Byzantium to the icy reaches of Greenland, Viking longships were the original global travelers. It's worth noting that Viking expansion wasn't just about pillaging, which, let's face it, gets all the press. It was also about forging connections, establishing trade networks that spanned Europe and beyond. These ships were the lifelines of an economic system that brought amber, furs, and walrus ivory from the north, and silver, spices, and wine from the south. The Vikings were traders just as much as they were raiders, and their longships were the vessels that made it all possible. Now, let's talk about the myth of the solitary Viking raider, that lone wolf figure who single-handedly terrorizes the coasts. It's a compelling image, isn't it? The brooding warrior silhouetted against the setting sun, the solitary hero in a saga of conquest. But like most good stories, it's more fiction than fact. The truth is, Viking raids were well-coordinated operations involving entire fleets. They were community affairs, supported by the very infrastructure that the longships themselves helped to build. Picture this: a fleet of 30 or more ships, each packed with warriors, setting sail for distant shores. Each ship was a microcosm of Viking society, with warriors, craftsmen, and traders all working together towards a common goal. This wasn't the work of a single hero. It was the result of careful planning, shared resources, and collective effort. Each raid was a high-stakes venture with everyone, from thralls to jarls, investing in its success. The spoils of these raids didn't just fill the pockets of individual warriors. They fueled entire economies, enriching communities and financing further expeditions. But why does the myth of the solitary raider persist? Maybe it's the allure of the lone hero, the idea that one person can change the world with sheer force of will. Or perhaps it's just easier to remember a single name than an entire fleet. Yet, the reality is more complex, more interconnected. The Vikings were a society that thrived on collaboration, and their legendary ships were a testament to this collective spirit. As the day draws to a close, and you gather with your fellow shipbuilders to celebrate the completion of your hard work, it's clear that this ship is more than just a tool of exploration or conquest. It's a symbol of Viking ingenuity, a reminder of their ability to adapt and innovate in a world as harsh and unpredictable as the North Sea itself. It's a legacy that continues to shape our understanding of exploration and trade, a testament to the enduring power of human collaboration. So, as you raise your horn of ale and toast to the voyage ahead, remember that this ship is more than just a vessel. It's a piece of history, a bridge between myth and reality. It's a reminder that while the legends may soar, it's the reality of human effort and ingenuity that truly endures. And tomorrow, as the ship sets sail on its maiden voyage, it will carry with it not just a crew, but the hopes and dreams of an entire community, a legacy that will continue to inspire for generations to come. In the 19th century, when the world was still figuring out how not to set drapes on fire with gas lamps, the Victorian ball emerged as the pinnacle of opulence and social maneuvering. These weren't just evenings of genteel dancing and polite conversation. They were gladiatorial arenas of wealth and influence, minus the lions, and with considerably more lace. Picture a modern-day gala, but replace the red carpet with a coach and four, and the paparazzi with gossiping dowagers. Let's talk numbers. Renting a venue for one of these lavish affairs could set a host back about £200 to £300 in Victorian currency. Adjusted for inflation, that's the equivalent of shelling out over £20,000 today. And that was just to secure the ballroom. This wasn't about having a great time. It was about one-upping the Joneses, or rather, the Fitzwilliams. If you were lucky, or rather, extraordinarily wealthy, you'd host the ball in your own estate, which meant you could skip the rental fee but would need to ensure your ballroom was up to snuff, lest the neighbors whisper about your outdated wallpaper. Now, as for the food, forget about slapping together a cheese platter from the local grocer. Catering for a Victorian ball was an exercise in culinary excess. Imagine a buffet that made the great exhibition look like a picnic. Hosts would serve up to 10 courses, including delicacies like turtle soup and roast pheasant, all washed down with rivers of champagne. The cost of feeding the guests often rivaled, if not exceeded, the venue rental, with expenses clocking in at another £200. In today's terms, that's an additional £20,000 for food. It's like hosting a Michelin-starred restaurant in your backyard for a night. The guest list was another complex beast. Victorian balls were the social media of their day, the ultimate networking event where your dance card was as important as your business card. Invitations were scarce commodities, sent out months in advance, and receiving one was akin to getting a golden ticket to Willy Wonka's factory. But the real game, getting your name in the society pages the next day, proving you weren't just at the ball, but part of its glittering elite. But why, you might ask, did these people spend small fortunes to prance around under chandeliers, which, by the way, were more likely to be candle-lit death traps than elegant lighting fixtures? Well, beyond the obvious display of wealth, it was all about making connections. This was linked in dressed in crinoline and silk. Marriages were arranged, business deals were struck, and alliances were forged, all while maneuvering through a waltz or a quadrille. The ball was an investment in one's social future, where a single misstep could spell disaster, not just for the evening, but for one's entire social standing. And let's not forget the fashion. Ah yes, the ball gown. More than just a dress, it was a statement. Women might spend upwards of £100 on a gown, roughly £10,000 today, ensuring they looked like a frothy pastel confection. Meanwhile, men donned their tailcoats and top hats, hoping to look dashing enough to balance the fashion scales tipped heavily in the women's favor. The absurdity of spending so much on a single outfit, only to wear it once for fear of being seen twice in the same dress, was lost on nobody, except perhaps the wearers themselves. After all, what's a little financial ruin when you can be the talk of the town for a night? So, the Victorian ball was less about twirling under chandeliers and more about navigating a social minefield with style and grace. It was a stage where fortunes were flaunted, reputations were made, and the occasional scandal was born. In today's parlance, it was go big or go home, and going home was never an option. But before anyone could dazzle under those precarious chandeliers, there was the small matter of preparing for the ball, a process that would make a modern wedding planner weep. Let's start with the invitations, because in the Victorian era, they were nothing short of an art form. These weren't your run-of-the-mill envelopes. They were elaborate creations, often embossed and gilded, that had to be hand-delivered by footmen. Yes, footmen, those dapper gents who were basically the postal service with a side of panache. The footman's task was no small feat, given that the average Victorian ball had a guest list that resembled a who's who of the aristocracy, often numbering in the hundreds. If your invite didn't arrive in style, well, you might as well have invited people via carrier pigeon. Now, let's talk about the RSVP. Today, you just click a button, but back then, it involved a carefully penned response, often on equally lavish stationery. The whole exercise was a masterclass in social etiquette, a way to flex one's literacy, and by extension, one's social graces. Receiving an invitation was akin to receiving a diploma in high society, but only if you knew how to play the game. And let's not forget the unspoken rule. Turning down an invite was as scandalous as wearing last year's fashion, which, in Victorian terms, was just a notch below being caught without your corset. Speaking of fashion, the pressure to assemble an outfit that screamed old money rather than new money was intense. Looking like you belonged to the upper crust wasn't just about having wealth. It was about showcasing it in the right way. Imagine the horror of being branded nouveau rich, as if you just rolled in from winning the lottery rather than inheriting your wealth from a string of titled ancestors. For the ladies, this meant a gown that was both extravagant and tasteful, a tricky balancing act akin to walking a tightrope in heels. We're talking about dresses that could cost upwards of £100, a sum that would translate to about £10,000 today. No small change for a single evening's attire. These gowns were often custom-made, with yards of silk, lace, and tulle, ensuring that the wearer floated into the ballroom like a pastel cloud. And then there was the hair, the crowning glory, or nightmare, depending on your perspective. Victorian hairstyles were architectural marvels, requiring an arsenal of hairpieces, wax, and pins to achieve those gravity-defying updos. It was a world where the phrase bad hair day could ruin more than just your mood. It could topple your social standing. Hairdressers of the time were akin to modern-day stylists, wielding heart-curling irons and endless patience. And let's face it, with hairstyles that could rival the Eiffel Tower in complexity, one needed more than a few Barbie pins to get through the night. For the gentleman, assembling the perfect ensemble was no less of a challenge. Tailcoats had to fit like a glove, and waistcoats needed to scream understated elegance. The goal was to look like you didn't try at all, which, as anyone who's ever dressed for a formal event knows, is the hardest look to pull off. Top hats were de rigueur, and a perfectly tied cravat was the cherry on top. A man who could master the art of the cravat was a man who could conquer the world, or at least navigate a Victorian ball with aplomb. Beyond the attire, there was the matter of arriving in style. Forget Uber. This was the age of the coach and four. Horses were groomed to perfection, carriages polished until they gleamed, and footmen donned their finest livery. It was a grand procession that announced to the world, or at least to the cluster of gawking onlookers, that you had arrived. Timing was everything. Fashionably late was the goal, but too late meant risking the wrath of the host, a social faux pas that could haunt you for seasons to come. With all this preparation, you might think that by the time the guests arrived, they'd be ready to collapse in a heap of exhaustion. But no, the evening was just beginning, and the real games were about to start. In this world of smoke and mirrors, where appearances were everything, the Victorian ball was an elaborate stage upon which the dramas of high society played out. Each guest was an actor in a complex social dance, where the stakes were high, and the rewards were priceless. As footmen opened carriage doors and guests ascended the steps, the air buzzed with anticipation. What alliances would form, what rivalries would simmer, and whose coiffure would hold the longest under the heat of the chandeliers. The night was young, and the possibilities were endless. As the guests ascended those grand steps and entered the ballroom, the scene was less about serenely drifting into a magical realm, and more like stepping onto a social battlefield, each dancer armed with a meticulously filled dance card. Ah, the dance card, a tiny booklet that was both a ticket to social triumph and a minefield of potential faux pas. These little treasures were often silk-bound and carried the weight of one's social fate for the evening. Ladies clutched them like lifelines, while gentlemen viewed them as tactical maps, each name scribbled within representing a potential alliance, or, heaven forbid, a snubbed opportunity. Now, let's talk about the dance floor, where the reality of the evening's entertainment unfolded in a flurry of lace, satin, and strategic footwork. For the uninitiated, it might have seemed like a seamless waltz of elegance, but those in the know understood it was more akin to a chess match. The evening's dance program was meticulously planned, with each dance carrying its own social significance. The waltz, for example, was the ballroom's version of a power move, a dance that allowed couples to hold each other scandalously close, making it prime territory for whispered negotiations or flirtations. The quadrille, on the other hand, was a group dance that resembled a genteel game of musical chairs, requiring partners to switch with dizzying frequency. It was less about romance and more about showcasing one's ability to remember complex steps without crashing into the next couple. One slip, and you find yourself the topic of the next morning's breakfast gossip, a fate worse than having your dance card half empty. And then there were the polkas and mazurkas, dances that demanded not just grace but agility, a test of one's ability to keep up with the tempo without twisting an ankle. In fact, it wasn't uncommon for a lady to emerge from the ball with a sprained foot, the result of an overzealous partner or an ill-timed twirl. But of course, no one would dare complain aloud. The true agony of a Victorian ball was the unspoken rule to endure whatever discomfort with a smile that said, "I'm having the time of my life," even if your feet were crying out for mercy. All this begs the question, what was the point of such an elaborate spectacle if it could so easily unravel into chaos? The answer lay in the strict social protocols that governed every interaction, ensuring that even missteps were wrapped in a veneer of decorum. For instance, a gentleman was obliged to ask permission before inscribing his name on a lady's dance card, and once a dance was promised, it was a contract as binding as any legal agreement. Breaking it would be akin to social suicide, a scandalous breach that could ripple through one's social circle with the force of a hurricane. A bemused attendee at a particularly grand event once remarked in a letter, "The dance floor is less a place of amusement than a field of strategic maneuvers, where each step must be calculated to maintain one's standing." That about sums it up. The ball wasn't just about dancing. It was about maintaining one's composure amidst the orchestrated chaos, a test of social acumen as much as physical coordination. And let's not forget the chaperones, those eagle-eyed sentinels who patrolled the edges of the dance floor like hawks. Their duty was to ensure propriety was upheld, preventing any young lady from being led astray by a suitor with less than noble intentions. In reality, they were the original social media moderators, ensuring that no scandalous behavior went unchecked. God forbid a couple should become too engrossed in conversation, or, heaven help us, sneak away to the garden for a private tete-a-tete. Such indiscretions could spell disaster, not just for the individuals involved, but for their families as well. The ball was a microcosm of Victorian society, a place where the rigid class structures and social hierarchies were both observed and subtly challenged. It was an arena where the nouveau rich could rub shoulders with the old aristocracy, where the daughters of industrialists might catch the eye of a titled gentleman looking to bolster his dwindling coffers with a well-endowed marriage. The stakes were high, and the rewards, whether social, financial, or romantic, were tantalizingly within reach for those who could navigate the evening's intricacies. In the midst of this grand spectacle, the orchestra played on, providing the soundtrack to a night of strategic dances and whispered alliances. These musicians were the unsung heroes of the ball, their role as vital as any guests. A single missed note or misjudged tempo could throw the entire affair into disarray, yet they performed with the grace and precision of a well-oiled machine, ensuring the evening flowed as smoothly as the champagne. So, the next time you picture a Victorian ball, remember that beneath the surface of glittering gowns and dazzling chandeliers lay a world of strategic maneuvering and high-stakes social gamesmanship. It was a night where fortunes could rise and fall with the music, where the dance floor was both a stage and a battlefield, and where the true art lay in balancing on the knife edge of propriety and ambition. The evening was anything but effortless, but for those who played the game well, the rewards were as grand as the setting itself. While the orchestra's melodies swirled through the chandelier-lit haze of the ballroom, beneath the gleaming surface of the Victorian ball lay the intricate dance of societal norms and political allegiances. These gatherings were more than just displays of opulence. They were stages where the rigid hierarchies of British society were not only visible, but actively reinforced. Think of them as the Oscars of the 19th century, where the real awards weren't golden statues, but social standing and strategic alliances. Let's peel back the velvet curtain and take a good look at the criteria for inclusion. Who made the cut for these exclusive shindigs, and who, you ask, was left nursing their FOMO in the drawing room? The guest list was a who's who of the upper crust, and the rules were as unwritten as they were unyielding. Aristocrats, landowners, and the burgeoning class of industrial titans were the main players, each with a vested interest in maintaining their position on the social ladder. If you were fortunate enough to receive an invitation, it wasn't just a testament to your wealth, but a nod to your political alliances and social acumen. For those not blessed with an ancestral title, money could open doors, provided it was the right kind of money. The nouveau rich, with their newly minted fortunes, often found themselves outside peering in. Their cash was welcome, but their company less so, unless they could convincingly masquerade as old money. It's like trying to sneak into the VIP section with a counterfeit wristband. Passable, but fraught with danger. The irony, of course, was that the old guard was often cash-strapped, their estates crumbling under the weight of tradition. A strategic marriage to a wealthy industrialist's daughter could refill the family coffers, but it was a delicate dance of discretion and pride. And then there was the matter of gender roles, which were as rigid as a starched collar. Victorian balls were arenas where women were expected to be seen and not heard, their value measured in beauty and decorum rather than wit or intelligence. The ideal woman was an angel in the house, and on the dance floor, with a smile that could outlast any social faux pas. Men, on the other hand, wielded power like a well-polished cane, their roles as decision-makers and protectors unquestioned by society. The dance floor didn't just host physical dances. It was a metaphor for the social choreography that dictated every movement and interaction. Let's talk politics, not the kind you see on campaign posters, but the subtler, more insidious variety. Victorian balls were fertile grounds for political alignments, where allegiances were formed and broken over champagne flutes and whispered conversations. In a society where one's word was often as binding as any legal contract, these gatherings were opportunities to solidify one's political influence. Who you were seen with, and more importantly, who you weren't, spoke volumes. A dance with the daughter of a political rival might raise eyebrows, but a whispered tete-a-tete with an influential peer could seal a deal that had been months in the making. The ball was also a microcosm of the empire itself, a place where the sun never set on British influence, even as it cast long shadows of exclusion. The empire's wealth was built on the backs of colonies, yet few at these balls gave a second thought to the source of their prosperity. The grandeur of the event was a testament to Britain's global reach, yet the very people who fueled this success remained invisible to the revelers. It was an unspoken truth, a shadowy backdrop to the glittering facade. In this world of social gymnastics, missteps were as perilous as they were inevitable. A misplaced word or a misjudged dance partner could ripple through one's social circle like a scandalous headline. Maintaining one's reputation required a deft balancing act, a tightrope walk between propriety and ambition. It was a game where the stakes were nothing short of one's future, and the rules were as fickle as fashion trends. The grandeur of the Victorian ball might have dazzled with its surface-level charm, but beneath the sparkle lay a labyrinth of rules and expectations that dictated every interaction. Each guest was an actor in a grand play, following a script as old as the aristocracy itself. The ball wasn't just a night of revelry, it was a performance, a chance to showcase one's finesse in navigating the treacherous waters of social hierarchy. As the night wore on and the orchestra played its final notes, the ball's true nature was laid bare, a microcosm of a society that valued appearances over authenticity, where the dance floor was both a stage and a battleground for societal norms and political power. Behind the laughter and the music were the whispers of deals struck and alliances formed, a reminder that even in the most elegant of settings, the pursuit of power and prestige was the ultimate dance. And so, as the last strains of the orchestra faded into the velvet night, the Victorian ball eventually waltzed off into history, leaving behind a glittering trail of memories wrapped in silk and scandal. But like any good party, the after-effects lingered long after the guests had departed. The 19th century was winding down, and with it, the era of the grand ball was slowly pirouetting into the past. The world was changing, and so too were the ways in which people connected. Enter the telephone, the game changer that made the concept of a dance card seem as antiquated as a powdered wig. Why wait months for a chance to chat discreetly in a ballroom when you could simply ring someone up? By the late 1870, Alexander Graham Bell's invention was shrinking the distance between conversations faster than you could say, "Hello, operator." It was the dawn of a new era, where communication wasn't limited to the confines of a candlelit ballroom. The telephone was the social media of its day, minus the selfies and hashtags. And then came the automobile, that noisy beast of progress that turned the genteel art of arriving fashionably late into an exercise in navigating traffic. With Henry Ford's Model T rolling out in the early 20th century, getting from point to B was no longer a matter of hitching up the horses. It was a revolution on wheels, democratizing travel, and in the process, widening the gap between the old world and the new. Suddenly, the allure of a coach and four felt as quaint as an old family portrait gathering dust in the attic. These technological marvels didn't just change how people communicated and traveled, they also rewrote the rules of social engagement. The Victorian ball, with its rigid protocols and stultifying formality, was losing its luster in a world that was moving at the speed of dial tones and combustion engines. The rigid social structures that once defined these events began to crumble, giving way to a more egalitarian society where one's status wasn't solely defined by a gilded invitation. Of course, nostalgia, that sly devil, has a way of painting the past in rose-tinted hues. To some, the Victorian ball remains an emblem of elegance and refinement, a testament to a bygone era where manners mattered and elegance reigned supreme. But let's be real for a moment. Beneath the polished veneer, these balls were as much about social climbing as they were about dancing. They were the linked-in of the aristocracy, where the currency of the realm was connections rather than bitcoins or followers. The truth is, the Victorian ball was as much a cage as it was a stage, a gilded arena where societal norms were both displayed and enforced. It was a world obsessed with appearances, where a single misstep could spell disaster, not just for an evening, but for one's entire social standing. The nostalgia that envelops these events often omits the pressures and constraints that came with them, a fact conveniently glossed over by those yearning for a return to simpler times. But while the grand balls of the Victorian era have twirled into the annals of history, their legacy lingers on in the way we gather today. Social dances have simply traded corsets and cravats for cocktail dresses and business casual. The modern wedding reception, the gala fundraiser, even the nightclub. These are the descendants of the Victorian ball, each echoing that age-old human desire to see and be seen. We may have swapped chandeliers for disco balls, but the essence remains the same. Connection, community, and let's not forget, a touch of spectacle. So next time you find yourself at a wedding, doing the Mackhenna with a drink in hand, remember that you're partaking in a tradition that dates back centuries. It's a reminder that while the trappings of society may change, the dance of human interaction remains timeless. We might not waltz under candlelit chandeliers anymore, but the dance continues, less formal perhaps, but no less meaningful. In the end, the Victorian ball was a product of its time, a reflection of a society in flux, grappling with the dual forces of tradition and modernity. As we look back on those nights of grandeur, it's important to recognize both the beauty and the absurdity of it all. After all, history is not just a collection of dates and events, but a story of people, their foibles, their triumphs, and their endless pursuit of connection. So here's to the Victorian ball, that grand spectacle of lace and ambition. Though its music has long since faded, its dance steps still resonate in the ways we gather, celebrate, and connect. And as we shuffle off this historical dance floor, perhaps a little wiser and a little more aware, we can appreciate the legacy it left behind. A legacy that reminds us that, no matter the era, the dance is always worth the effort. In the bustling streets of ancient Carthage, a city dripping with wealth from its far-reaching trade, a young boy stood with a gleam in his eye and a hefty chip on his shoulder. That boy, Hannibal Barca, was about to take an oath that would echo through the ages. This wasn't your average playground promise. This was a solemn vow to wage eternal war against Rome, the superpower du jour. But let's rewind a bit first. Born in 247 BCE, Hannibal entered a world still licking its wounds from the First Punic War, a conflict that had turned Rome and Carthage into bitter frenemies. Carthage, perched on the North African coast, was no slouch. It was a powerhouse of trade, reeling in wealth from its maritime empire that spanned from Spain to Sicily. Yet, its military might had taken a hit, and the Romans were about as friendly as a pack of wolves eyeing a wounded deer. Enter Hamilcar Barca, Hannibal's dad, a man who could give any modern-day action hero a run for his money. Picture him as a sort of ancient Liam Neeson with a very particular set of skills, and a burning desire to see Rome get a taste of humble pie. Hamilcar had been one of Carthage's top generals during the First Punic War and was hell-bent on redeeming his city's honor. His plan: invade Iberia, that's Spain for those of us who didn't pay attention in geography class, and build a new power base. He wasn't just thinking military conquest. He had economics on his mind, too. Iberia was rich with silver mines, and controlling them meant charging for Carthage's coffers. Maintaining an army wasn't cheap. Think thousands of soldiers with a taste for well-cooked lamb and the occasional amphora of wine. Those expenses add up faster than you can say denarii. Hamilcar's ambitions weren't just for himself. He had a legacy to think about, and in true dynastic fashion, he didn't leave anything to chance. He dragged his 9-year-old son Hannibal to the altar of Baal, the Carthaginian god with a flair for the dramatic, and had the kids swear to be a lifelong enemy of Rome. Now, most 9-year-olds are more concerned with the state of their latest mud pie, but Hannibal, he was setting his sights on the Roman Empire. Talk about ambition. As Hannibal grew, so did his understanding of warfare and strategy under the watchful eye of his father. Hamilcar's influence was as potent as the Carthaginian wine, strong enough to leave a lasting impression. Young Hannibal was molded into a military prodigy, absorbing the tactics and strategies that would later make him one of history's most formidable generals. He learned to think on his feet, adapt to changing circumstances, and most importantly, never underestimate the enemy. The socio-political climate of Carthage was a heady mix of ambition, rivalry, and a touch of paranoia. It was a city caught between the glory of its past and the uncertainty of its future, much like a washed-up celebrity trying to stage a comeback tour. By 221 BCE, Hannibal had risen through the ranks, thanks to a combination of his own prowess and a hefty dose of nepotism. He wasn't just handed power on a silver platter. He earned it through sheer tenacity and a knack for outsmarting rivals both on the battlefield and in the political arena. His rise was a testament to his father's training and the unforgiving environment in which he was raised. Carthage was a city that demanded strength, cunning, and a willingness to play dirty when necessary, qualities Hannibal had in spades. As Hannibal took the reins of power, he wasn't just stepping into his father's sandals. He was stepping onto the stage of history, ready to take on Rome with a mix of strategic genius and a little bit of theatrical flair. His oath, sworn all those years ago, was about to become a reality. The stage was set for a clash of titans, with Hannibal poised to become Rome's greatest foe, a title he would wear like a laurel wreath, albeit one tinged with a bit of Carthaginian swagger. And so, the boy who swore vengeance at the altar of Baal was ready to make good on his promise. With Carthage's wealth backing him and a lifetime of training behind him, Hannibal was more than prepared to take on the might of Rome. The coming years would see battles that would become the stuff of legend, with Hannibal at the center, orchestrating his moves with the precision of a master chess player. But for now, he stood on the brink, ready to unleash his strategic brilliance and fulfill the oath that had defined his life. With the weight of Carthaginian history and a personal vendetta against Rome riding on his shoulders, Hannibal Barca was about to embark on one of the most audacious military campaigns ever conceived. If there's one thing that gets historians all hot and bothered, it's the image of Hannibal leading his army. And yes, those famous 37 elephants across the Alps in 218 BCE. But let's pump the brakes a bit and unpack what actually went down, because this isn't just a story of scenic hikes and pachyderms with altitude sickness. First, let's talk numbers. Hannibal started his trek with about 50,000 troops, consisting of a diverse mix of Africans, Spaniards, Gauls, and others who answered his call. It was like the ancient version of a multinational corporation, each bringing their own unique skills to the table. But this isn't some fairy tale where everyone makes it through unscathed. Crossing the Alps was no walk in a marble Roman park. Even with modern climbing gear, it wouldn't be a picnic, and Hannibal's army had to brave the elements without north-faced jackets or granola bars. The logistics of this crossing were mind-boggling. Imagine feeding 50,000 hungry soldiers, not to mention the elephants, who were like your oversized pet dogs, but with a penchant for eating a ton more. The Alps, in all their majestic glory, were less than accommodating. Ancient sources tell us that Hannibal lost nearly half his men, and most of his elephants during the crossing due to harsh weather, treacherous paths, and attacks from local tribes who weren't exactly offering hot cocoa and a warm welcome. By the time he descended into the Po Valley, his army was a shadow of its former self. But one thing was clear. Hannibal had pulled off a logistical miracle that left Rome quaking in its sandals. Now, let's bust some myths, shall we? The image of Hannibal as some sort of ancient Indiana Jones, swinging over crevices on elephant trunks, is more Hollywood than history. The reality was grittier and far less glamorous. Archaeological evidence, like recently discovered deposits of animal dung. Yes, you read that right. Helps us piece together the actual route taken. It wasn't the romanticized straight shot through the heart of the Alps. It was a series of tactical maneuvers, each decision weighed against the brutal economic realities of keeping an army fed and functional. Speaking of economics, Hannibal wasn't just a military genius. He was a shrewd economist. His strategy wasn't just about outmuscling the Romans. It was about outsmarting them economically. By choosing a route that bypassed Roman strongholds and allied with local tribes, he ensured a steady supply of resources. This wasn't just an act of war. It was an economic siege. The Romans, with their coffers bursting from taxing their vast empire, suddenly found themselves in a costly game of cat and mouse. A game Hannibal was all too happy to play. And let's not forget the diplomatic finesse Hannibal displayed. Far from being a bull in a china shop, he negotiated with local Gallic tribes, turning potential enemies into allies. His ability to read the political landscape rivaled his tactical acumen on the battlefield. He knew that winning hearts and minds was just as crucial as winning battles, and he played the diplomatic game with the skill of a seasoned statesman. As Hannibal and his army emerged from the Alps, battered but unbroken, they faced their first major confrontation with Rome at the Battle of Trebia. This wasn't just a skirmish. It was a full-on clash of titans. Hannibal, ever the master strategist, used the terrain to his advantage, luring the Roman forces into a trap that would become his signature move. The Romans, confident and perhaps a little cocky, marched their troops straight into a marshy death trap. With the Trebia River at their backs and Hannibal's forces surrounding them, the Romans were in for a rude awakening. The battle was a display of Hannibal's cunning. He used his cavalry to flank the Roman forces, while his infantry held the line. It was a textbook example of divide and conquer, and Hannibal executed it with the precision of a maestro conducting a symphony. The result? A decisive Carthaginian victory that left Rome reeling and questioning their invincibility. But before we wrap this up with a neat little bow, let's not forget the human cost of these grand strategies. The battle left thousands dead, and the aftermath was a grim reminder that even the greatest military victories come with a heavy price. For Hannibal, the victory at Trebia was just the beginning of his campaign in Italy. a campaign that would cement his reputation as one of history's greatest military minds. So, as Hannibal's army regrouped and Rome licked its wounds, the stage was set for the next act in this ancient drama. The Alps had been crossed, the first battle won, but the war was far from over. Hannibal, ever the relentless tactician, was already plotting his next move. And Rome, well, they were starting to realize that they'd underestimated the boy who swore vengeance at the altar of Baal. An epic clash was on the horizon, and both sides were gearing up for a showdown that would echo through the ages. Stay tuned, because in the world of ancient warfare, the drama is just getting started. As Hannibal prepared for the next chapter in his legendary campaign, the Romans were still trying to shake off the sting of their recent defeat. With the Alps and Trebia now behind him, Hannibal was eyeing a stage fit for the grandest of dramas, the plains of Cannae in 216 BCE. If Hannibal's previous successes had left Rome with a headache, what he was about to unleash would feel like a full-blown migraine. Now, let's set the scene. The Roman Republic was reeling, and when Romans reel, they don't just sit around sipping wine. Oh no, they double down on their military might. Faced with the charismatic Carthaginians' unyielding campaign, Rome decided to go big or go home, though going home wasn't really an option. They amassed an army of approximately 86,000 men, a force that would make any commander's eyes water with pride or fear, depending on which side they were on. It was a classic case of more is more, and the Romans were all in. Hannibal, on the other hand, was operating with just about 50,000 troops. You could almost hear the Roman commanders snickering in their togas, thinking sheer numbers would turn the tide. But Hannibal, ever the cunning tactician, knew that fighting wasn't just about numbers. It was about strategy. Enter the double envelopment maneuver, which sounds like something you'd see in a spy movie, but is actually a masterclass in battlefield choreography. Picture this. The Romans, with their vast numbers, charged headlong into the Carthaginian forces, thinking they'd smash through like a hot knife through butter. Hannibal, however, had other plans. He arranged his troops in a crescent formation, with the center deliberately made weaker. As the Romans pushed in, sure of their impending victory, the Carthaginian flanks didn't just hold, they wrapped around like a pair of strategic arms. Before the Romans knew it, they were enveloped on all sides, trapped in a lethal embrace. It was like a historical judo move, using the enemy's momentum against them. The result? A staggering Roman defeat. Estimates suggest that around 50,000 to 70,000 Roman soldiers were killed in a single day, a loss so catastrophic it sent shockwaves through the Republic. That's more than just a military setback. It was a full-blown existential crisis. The Romans, who prided themselves on their military prowess, were now staring at the abyss, wondering if this was the end of their seemingly unstoppable rise. Let's talk about the psychological impact, shall we? If the Roman legions were the pride of the Republic, then Cannae was a gut punch that left Rome questioning its very identity. The sheer scale of the disaster was like a bad dream, a nightmare that kept replaying every time a Roman citizen closed their eyes. The Senate, those stalwart symbols of Roman governance, were left in disarray. Imagine a room full of toga-wearing politicians, each trying to outdo the other in panic. It was a national trauma, and the ghosts of Cannae would haunt Rome for years to come. But while Rome was licking its wounds, Hannibal was playing the psychological game like a maestro. You see, victory on the battlefield was just one part of his strategy. The other was propaganda. He sent back captured Roman standards, and even some Roman heads, yes, heads, as trophies to Carthage. It was a brutal, albeit effective, way to boost morale at home and strike fear into the hearts of his enemies. Hannibal knew that controlling the narrative was just as crucial as controlling the battlefield. Yet despite this triumph, Hannibal's supposed invincibility would soon be put to the test. The myth that he was unbeatable began to take root, and who doesn't love a good myth? But like all great myths, the reality was a lot messier. Sure, Hannibal had pulled off a tactical masterpiece, but the Roman spirit wasn't so easily crushed. They were like a particularly stubborn weed, refusing to die no matter how many times you stomped on them. And while the Romans regrouped, they were also learning. Cannae taught them the bitter lesson that innovation and adaptation were their best weapons against this Carthaginian juggernaut. Hannibal's victories, dazzling as they were, couldn't sustain themselves without the logistical support of a homeland that was, frankly, losing interest. Carthage, ever the merchant city, was more interested in trade than military conquest, a fact that would eventually leave Hannibal on shaky ground. So, as Hannibal's reputation as a military genius grew, so did the cracks in his seemingly unassailable facade. The Romans might have been down, but they were far from out. They began to adopt a strategy of attrition, avoiding large-scale battles, and instead focusing on small victories that chipped away at Hannibal's forces, slowly but surely. In the grand theater of war, Hannibal was the star, but the Romans were the relentless understudies, waiting for their moment to shine. And while Hannibal continued to rack up victories, the reality was that each win came at a greater cost, both in manpower and resources. The legend of Hannibal's invincibility was captivating, but like all legends, it was built on a foundation of grit and, eventually, exhaustion. As we stand at this precipice, with Hannibal at the height of his powers and Rome grappling with its darkest hour, the stage is set for a dramatic turn. The myth of invincibility is seductive, but every myth has its unraveling. Hannibal's story is far from over, and Rome, with its unyielding spirit, is poised for a comeback that would defy the odds. Stay tuned, because this ancient saga is about to take a turn that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the art of war and the resilience of an empire. As Hannibal stood on the brink of his next move, the stars of his legend seemed aligned, but reality, as always, had other plans. With Rome on the ropes, you might think Hannibal was ready to deliver the knockout punch. But instead of storming the gates of Rome itself, he set about a campaign of destruction across the Italian countryside. Why not march straight to Rome and finish the job, you ask? Well, here's where the myth gets a reality check. Hannibal's stint in Italy wasn't just a series of epic battles. It was a marathon of strategic endurance, with Hannibal playing the role of a wily fox outsmarting the Roman hounds. You see, capturing Rome wasn't as simple as rolling up with elephants and demanding the keys to the city. Rome's formidable walls and the resolve of its citizens presented a challenge that even Hannibal's genius couldn't easily surmount. And with his supply lines stretched thinner than a Roman senator's patience, he didn't have the resources for a prolonged siege. Logistics, let's talk about them. Feeding an army in enemy territory is like trying to keep a horde of teenagers satisfied with a single pizza. Hannibal's army, a diverse mix of battle-hardened veterans and local recruits, needed constant supplies, and while he could pillage the countryside for a while, it wasn't sustainable. Rome, with its vast network of allies and resources, could replace losses faster than Hannibal could inflict them. It was like trying to win a game of whack-a-mole, but the moles kept multiplying. Enter Fabius Maximus, the Roman general who became Hannibal's greatest nemesis without ever meeting him head-on in battle. Dubbed Cunctator, or the Delayer, Fabius was the master of avoiding direct confrontation, much to the frustration of his fellow Romans who were itching for a fight. Instead of risking another canny, Fabius opted for a war of attrition, shadowing Hannibal's movements and harassing his supply lines. It was the ancient equivalent of passive-aggressive warfare, and it drove Hannibal up the metaphorical wall. Now, if you're thinking Fabius was all about avoiding conflict because he was scared, think again. His strategy was all about draining Hannibal's resources and forcing him to make a mistake. It was like a high-stakes game of chess where Fabius refused to move his pieces into Hannibal's traps. And while this approach didn't win him any popularity contests back home, Romans loved a good showdown as much as the next civilization. It proved effective in the long run. But let's not give Fabius all the credit just yet. Hannibal was no slouch in the political arena either. He tried to incite rebellion among Rome's allies, hoping to fracture the Republic from within. Some cities did defect, but the vast majority, bound by Rome's promises and threats, stayed loyal. It was a testament to Rome's diplomatic prowess and the fear of Rome's retribution. Because if there's one thing worse than Hannibal at your gates, it's an angry Roman legion marching in for payback. The economic strain of this drawn-out conflict was like a vice tightening around Carthage and Rome. For Carthage, Hannibal's campaign was a financial black hole. With limited resources being funneled into the war effort, other aspects of Carthaginian life, like trade, started feeling the pinch. Carthage was a city that lived and died by its commerce, and as Hannibal's Italian adventure dragged on, the merchants back home began to grumble. Rome, for its part, was digging deep into its reserves. War chests were being emptied, taxes increased, and new levies called up to replace the staggering losses. It was like a national emergency that just wouldn't quit. But the Romans, resilient as ever, were willing to endure whatever it took to expel Hannibal from their lands. Despite his tactical brilliance, Hannibal was gradually realizing that he was fighting an uphill battle against a foe that refused to roll over and die. In the years following Cannae, he won battles but couldn't win the war. It was a slow grind, with neither side gaining a decisive edge. The Romans, ever adaptable, were learning from their mistakes and slowly closing the net around Hannibal's forces. By 203 BCE, the situation had reached a tipping point. Rome had turned the tide, striking back in Spain and North Africa, threatening Carthage itself. Hannibal, still in Italy, was ordered to return home to defend the city that had given him life and purpose. It was a reluctant retreat, but one driven by necessity. His Italian campaign was an epic saga of guts, glory, and ultimately a lesson in the limits of even the greatest military minds. Hannibal's years in Italy were a masterclass in strategy, but also a humbling reminder of the relentless nature of war. The legend of Hannibal as Rome's greatest foe was secure, but the reality was that even legends must sometimes yield to the harsh truths of supply and demand, morale, and the indomitable spirit of a people unwilling to be conquered. As Hannibal made his way back to Carthage, the story was far from over, and the echoes of his campaign would reverberate through history, a testament to the complexity of war and the resilience of both victor and vanquished. Stay tuned, because the final chapter of this saga promises to be as riveting as the path that led us here. And so, with the fate of Carthage hanging by a thread, Hannibal returned home, not as the conqueror he had once envisioned, but as a general facing the ultimate test. His showdown with Rome would culminate at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE, a face-off more nerve-wracking than a tightrope walk over a canyon. Here, in the sun-scorched plains of North Africa, Hannibal met his match in Scipio Africanus, the Roman general who had learned the art of war from none other than Hannibal himself. Talk about a dramatic twist. It's like Batman going up against a Robin who's been hitting the gym and reading Sun Tzu. Scipio didn't just stroll into this battle with blind bravado. He had studied Hannibal's tactics like a detective poring over case files, and he came prepared. The Roman army was now a finely tuned machine, having adapted new strategies and formations to counter the Carthaginian menace. Scipio's forces numbered around 35,000 infantry and 700 cavalry, a formidable assembly, but not overwhelmingly superior to Hannibal's 36,000 infantry and 4,000 cavalry. The numbers were tight, but Scipio had an ace up his sleeve. The famous elephants that had once been Hannibal's trump card were now a liability. Scipio arranged his troops in columns and instructed his men to blow trumpets and wave banners, creating chaos among the pachyderms. Picture a rock concert where the main act panics and runs off stage. The elephants turn tail, causing more havoc in their own lines than among the Romans. It was a clever twist of fate, watching Hannibal's own playbook being used against him. The battle itself was a brutal affair, a testament to the grueling nature of ancient warfare. Hannibal's veterans fought valiantly, but the disciplined Roman legions, bolstered by their Numidian cavalry allies, finally turned the tide. The cavalry, led by the cavalry commander Massinissa, smashed into Hannibal's rear lines, sealing his fate. In a matter of hours, the once vaunted Carthaginian army lay in ruins, a shadow of its former glory. It was a bitter pill for Hannibal to swallow, a reminder that even legends can be brought low by the relentless march of time and strategy. Defeated but not broken, Hannibal retreated to Carthage, where he urged the city to make peace with Rome. The terms were harsh. Carthage had to dismantle its navy, pay a hefty indemnity, and essentially become a Roman vassal state. For Hannibal, who had dedicated his life to the destruction of Rome, it was a humbling conclusion to a campaign that had once seemed unstoppable. Yet he didn't curl up in a corner and sulk. Instead, he turned his formidable intellect to politics, becoming a suffet, a chief magistrate in Carthage. In this new role, Hannibal proved to be as adept a politician as he was a general. He reformed the Carthaginian government, cracking down on corruption and revitalizing the economy. It was a classic case of turning lemons into lemonade, or, in his case, turning war elephants into effective bureaucratic reforms. But success breeds envy, and the political landscape in Carthage was as treacherous as any battlefield. With his reforms making waves, detractors whispered that he still harbored ambitions against Rome. It was the kind of intrigue that would make a Shakespearean villain nod in approval. Faced with mounting pressure, Hannibal chose exile over conflict. He wandered across the Mediterranean like a celebrity on a world tour, except this wasn't for selfies and autographs. He spent time in the courts of Syria and Bithynia, advising kings and never quite letting go of his dream of challenging Rome. His strategic insights continued to influence military tactics across the ancient world, a testament to the enduring power of his legacy. His story became the stuff of legends, with tales of his cunning and courage whispered in the corridors of power from Alexandria to Athens. Yet, the end of Hannibal's life is often shrouded in myth and drama, a fitting finale for a man whose life was a saga of epic proportions. The romanticized tales of his death tell of suicide, a final act of defiance against Rome. The story goes that, cornered by Roman emissaries while in Bithynia, he chose poison over capture, uttering the words, "Let us relieve the Romans of their fear if they cannot wait for an old man's death." It's a powerful image, but like most legends, the truth is likely less theatrical. Historical evidence remains sparse, but what is certain is that Hannibal's death marked the end of an era. So, what did Hannibal leave behind, aside from a trail of Roman nightmares and a legacy of military brilliance? His strategies have been studied by military leaders throughout history, from Napoleon to General Patton. The concept of using terrain to one's advantage, understanding the enemy's psychology, and the innovative use of diverse troops were all lessons drawn from his campaigns. His crossing of the Alps with elephants became a symbol of audacious strategy, a reminder that sometimes the boldest moves are the ones that leave the deepest marks. In the grand tapestry of history, Hannibal Barca stands out not just for his military genius, but for his unyielding resolve in the face of overwhelming odds. He was a man who dared to dream big in a world where failure meant more than just losing a game. It meant the survival or extinction of nations. His story is a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and battles, but a reflection of human ambition, ingenuity, and the eternal struggle against fate. And so, as we close the book on Hannibal's life, we see that his legacy is not just carved in the annals of history, but in the minds of those who dare to defy convention and challenge the status quo. His lessons echo through the ages, a testament to the power of strategy and the indomitable spirit of those who stand against the tide. While the tale of Hannibal may be fraught with myth and romance, at its core lies the undeniable truth that greatness is not merely achieved, but earned through grit, determination, and an unwavering vision. Before he became the bearded icon splashed across dorm room walls and t-shirts worldwide, Ernesto Che Guevara was a young man with a wheeze that could rival a faulty accordion. Born in Argentina in 1928, Che's early life was as colorful as the paisley shirts of the 1960s. His family wasn't poor, but they weren't swimming in pesos either. They lived in a large, rambling house in Alta Gracia, which could generously be described as rustic. In reality, it was a bit of a fixer-upper, with drafts that could chill even the most stoic of souls. Asthma was Che's uninvited lifelong companion, ensuring he never took a full breath for granted. In a way, his asthma had a comical role in his life, like a persistent sidekick that refused to leave the show. It didn't stop him from pursuing sports, though. He played rugby with the kind of reckless enthusiasm that made spectators question his life choices. And he became an avid swimmer, perhaps because the water didn't care if you wheezed, like an old steam engine. But let's talk about the motorcycle journey, the odyssey that turned Ernesto into Che. In 1952, at the ripe age of 23, he embarked on a grand adventure with his buddy Alberto Granado. Their vehicle of choice was a Norton 500cc motorbike lovingly dubbed La Poderosa, or the Mighty One. Ironically, the Mighty One had a tendency to break down more often than a soap opera character, but its cantankerous nature was part of its charm. This bike had all the reliability of a politician's promise, yet it was their steed for an 8-month journey across nearly 8,000 kilometers of South American terrain. The journey started in Buenos Aires, full of youthful bravado and the kind of blind optimism that only 20-somethings possess. Outfitted with a tent and a camera, they set off with a dream and not much else. The trip was less about precision engineering and more about fixing things with duct tape and prayer. From the very start, they were met with misadventures. The bike frequently sputtered to a halt, forcing them to hitchhike, walk, or rely on the kindness of strangers. One memorable incident involved crashing into a cow, a sequence that would have been slapstick comedy if not for the bruises. The cow was unamused, and she learned an important lesson about bovine indifference. As they traveled, the duo witnessed the staggering poverty and social injustice that plagued the continent. They visited leper colonies, mines, and indigenous communities, each stop a revelation in human suffering and resilience. In Chile, they met miners who worked in conditions that would make a Dickensian workhouse look like a spa. In Peru, they came face to face with the systemic inequality that kept indigenous people in poverty. Chi, the asthmatic rugby player, saw these injustices with the clarity of a man who had just had his glasses cleaned. The trip was a reality check, a wake-up call louder than any alarm clock. It was as if the universe was saying, "Hey, Ernesto, there's more to life than Buenos Aires and rugby tackles." The journey transformed Chi from an adventurous medical student into a man with a mission. The romantic notion of the road trip is often about freedom and spontaneity, but Chi's journey was about awakening. This was no Kerouac-esque ride into the sunset. This was a plunge into the deep end of human inequality. In his diary, Chi wrote about the mute pain of the outcasts, a poetic way of describing the silent suffering he observed. He was witnessing the harsh realities of Latin America, where wealth was concentrated in the hands of the few, and the many were left to fend for themselves. He began to see himself not just as a traveler, but as a part of a larger struggle against oppression. By the time they reached Venezuela, Chi was no longer just Ernesto, the kid from Argentina. He was Chi, the man who would soon become a revolutionary. His asthma was still there, of course, puffing away like a steam train in the background, but it seemed less important now. What mattered was the fire in his belly, ignited by the injustices he had witnessed firsthand. This journey was the crucible that forged Chi's revolutionary spirit. It was a ride full of laughter, engine troubles, and run-ins with livestock. But more importantly, it was an education. Chi had seen the world in all its gritty reality, and he was never going to look at it the same way again. So there you have it, the tale of a young man and his less-than-mighty motorcycle, embarking on a journey that would change him forever. It's a story of wheezing and wandering, of breakdowns and breakthroughs, and of a vision that extended far beyond the horizon. This was just the beginning for Che Guevara, the man who would become a symbol of revolution, with a legacy as complex and contradictory as the man himself. As the sun set on Che's transformative journey through South America, the horizon of his life was about to be painted with the bold strokes of revolution. The idealistic Ernesto had encountered the stark realities of inequality, and his next chapter would take him to Cuba, where he would rise from a mere footnote in history to a headline. Enter Fidel Castro, the charismatic revolutionary with a penchant for cigars and a vision for change. Together, they would become the dynamic duo of the Cuban Revolution, with Che's asthma in tow as the uninvited third wheel. Now, the Cuban Revolution wasn't exactly a tiki-bar dance-off. This was a gritty, grueling slog through the Sierra Maestra Mountains, where every step was a reminder that paradise was, in fact, lost in the jungle. It was 1956 when Che joined Castro and about 80 other hopeful revolutionaries on the Granma, an overloaded yacht that had all the seaworthiness of a bathtub. Their mission, to overthrow the dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista. The Granma's voyage was a nautical disaster, with the ship running aground and the band of revolutionaries having to hoof it to the hills, an inauspicious start to their campaign. Che, ever the romantic figure in the eyes of future generations, was not exactly the sharpshooter of legend. In fact, his aim was the stuff of legend for all the wrong reasons. It was said that he couldn't hit the broad side of a barn if his life depended on it, which, in the jungle, it often did. But what Che lacked in marksmanship, he made up for in medical skills and an unyielding resolve that inspired those around him. His famous beard began to grow, not as a style statement, but as a practical response to the lack of shaving supplies. Who knew that a face full of facial hair would one day become an emblem of rebellion? The reality of guerrilla warfare in the Cuban jungles was a world away from the romanticized images that would later adorn posters. The rebels faced sweltering heat, mosquitoes with a bloodlust rivaling any vampire, and the ever-present threat of Battista's forces. Supplies were scarce, and food was as elusive as a coherent plot in a B-movie. The economic struggles were tangible. Maintaining an army in the jungle wasn't just about waving flags and shouting slogans. It was about logistics, how to feed, arm, and mobilize a ragtag group of revolutionaries against a well-supplied military. Yet, amidst the chaos, Chi's charisma and leadership qualities began to shine. He was soon promoted to commander, a role that would cement his status as a revolutionary icon. His ability to motivate his comrades, despite the dire circumstances, was a testament to his growing influence. The man who once crashed into a cow was now orchestrating military tactics, leading missions that were perilous, yet pivotal. The Battle of Santa Clara in 1958 was a turning point, where Chi's forces derailed a train carrying Battista's troops, a victory that would eventually lead to the dictator's downfall. But let's not get carried away with the heroics. The romantic image of Chi as a freedom fighter often glosses over the darker aspects of his methods. War, as they say, is hell, and Chi's approach could be as ruthless as it was revolutionary. He was known for his strict discipline and his belief in the necessity of violence to achieve their goals. This duality, the noble idealist with an iron fist, adds layers to his legacy, making it as complex as the jungle battles he fought. By the time Batista fled Cuba on New Year's Day 1959, leaving behind a regime as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane, Chi had become a central figure in the new government. The economic challenges, however, were far from over. Cuba's infrastructure was in shambles, and the country's coffers were emptier than politicians' promises post-election. Chi, ever the man of action, was appointed as the head of the National Bank of Cuba and later the Minister of Industry. His vision was to transform Cuba into a self-sufficient, socialist state, a task that was easier said than done. But let's not pretend that Chi's economic policies were universally successful. His attempts to rapidly industrialize Cuba often met with mixed results. The effort to diversify the economy away from sugar, a commodity that had as much control over Cuba as mosquitoes had over its jungles, proved to be a Herculean task. The centralized planning model he championed faced logistical nightmares, with distribution networks as tangled as a conspiracy theory. The reality of turning ideology into practice was a reminder that even revolutionary zeal couldn't always outpace economic realities. In the end, Chi's time in Cuba was marked by both triumph and tribulation. He had risen to prominence alongside Castro, becoming a symbol of rebellion and resistance. Yet, the gritty reality of guerrilla warfare and the harsh economic struggles he faced as a leader painted a more nuanced picture. Che Guevara was not just the legendary figure on a t-shirt. He was a man driven by ideals, navigating a world that was as unforgiving as the jungle he once called his battleground. So there you have it, a glimpse into Chi's rise during the Cuban Revolution, where the romanticized image meets the gritty truth. Stay tuned as we delve further into his life, exploring the next chapters of this complex character, who remains as enigmatic as the revolution he helped ignite. As Che Guevara stepped out of the Cuban limelight, his ambition was as voracious as ever. Having played a starring role in Cuba's revolutionary theater, Che wasn't content to rest on his laurels or indeed his lungs. With his asthma still wheezing like a broken accordion, he set his sights on a new stage, the world. His mission, to export the fiery spirit of revolution to other corners of the globe, an endeavor that would test the limits of both his idealism and his endurance. Enter the Congo, 1965, a country in chaos, political stability as elusive as a mirage in the desert. The Congo had just emerged from Belgian colonial rule, only to be plunged into a power struggle that made a Game of Thrones plot look straightforward. Che, convinced that his revolutionary magic could be bottled and shipped anywhere, saw the Congo as fertile ground for his brand of insurrection. With a small band of Cuban exiles, he ventured into the heart of Africa, determined to fan the flames of rebellion. But the harsh realities of Congolese politics hit Che like a freight train. The local fighters, led by Laurent Desiré Kabila, yes, The same Kabila who would later become a president were less a cohesive force and more a loose collection of factions with the discipline of a kindergarten class on a sugar high. Chi's attempts to instill guerrilla warfare tactics were about as effective as teaching a cat to fetch. His revolutionary fervor, while inspiring in theory, clashed with the realities on the ground. The economic backdrop was equally daunting. The Congo was a resource-rich nation, yet its wealth was more elusive than a unicorn. The revenues from diamonds and minerals were siphoned off by foreign interests and local elites, leaving the country poorer than a church mouse with expensive habits. Chi's dream of an armed rebellion floundered amidst logistical nightmares. Supplies were scarce, and local support was tepid at best. The Congolese populace, exhausted by years of conflict, viewed the Cuban contingent with suspicion, if they noticed them at all. Chi's time in the Congo was a humbling experience. The myth of the infallible revolutionary leader took a beating as his plans unraveled in the face of intractable social and political complexities. It was a lesson in the limits of ideology when confronted with the gritty realities of local dynamics. By the end of 1965, Chi was forced to retreat, his dream of a Pan-African revolution dashed, but not entirely extinguished. His exit from the Congo was as inglorious as his arrival had been hopeful, a sobering reminder that charisma and conviction could only carry one so far. Undeterred by his African misadventures, Chi turned his gaze to Bolivia, a country nestled in the Andes with a political landscape as treacherous as its mountainous terrain. Bolivia in the mid-1960s was a country plagued by poverty, with an economy more fragile than a soap bubble. The income disparity was as glaring as a neon sign in a blackout, with wealth concentrated in the hands of a few. She believed that Bolivia's disenfranchised masses were ripe for revolution, a conviction that led him to embark on yet another quixotic quest. In 1966, Chi slipped into Bolivia under the alias of Adolfo Mina Gonzalez, a name that had all the subtlety of a spy novel cliché. His plan was to establish a guerrilla force in the Nyancahuazu region, a remote area that was supposed to serve as the cradle for a continental revolution. But once again, the reality on the ground was as welcoming as a porcupine in a balloon factory. The Bolivian peasants, whom Chi hoped to rally, were more interested in tilling their fields than taking up arms. The language barrier didn't help. Chi and his companions spoke Spanish, while many locals spoke Quechua or Aymara, creating a communication gap wider than the Andes themselves. The logistical challenges were formidable. Supplies dwindled alarmingly fast, and the Bolivian army, with a little help from the CIA, turned out to be a more formidable adversary than Chi had anticipated. The local support he had banked on proved to be as reliable as a weather forecast, and his band of revolutionaries dwindled with each skirmish. The harsh Bolivian terrain was an unforgiving teacher, and Chi's health began to falter. His asthma, that old nemesis, returned with a vengeance, making every breath an exercise in endurance. Yet, even as his situation became increasingly desperate, Chi's idealism burned brightly. He penned his last missives with a fervor that belied the grimness of his circumstances, calling for unity and perseverance even as the walls closed in. In October 1967, the Bolivian military captured Chi in the village of La Higra, a place that would become infamous as the site of his execution. The image of Chi, defiant to the end, became etched into the annals of revolutionary mythology. His death at the age of 39 transformed him from a living icon into a martyr of almost mythical proportions. The romanticized image of Chi, the guerrilla leader who died fighting for his ideals, was cemented in the public imagination, even as the reality of his flawed, human struggles was often glossed over. Yet, even in death, Chi's legacy continued to ripple across the globe, inspiring revolutionary movements and resistance efforts from Latin America to Africa and beyond. His life was a testament to the power of ideals, the complexity of human endeavor, and the often harsh realities of political struggle. While the myth of Che Guevara is larger than life, the truth is that he was a man driven by conviction, whose achievements and failures alike offer lessons that are as relevant today as they were in his time. And so, the saga of Che Guevara continues, a tapestry woven with threads of heroism, folly, and enduring influence. As we move forward, we'll delve deeper into the impact of his life and the legacy he left behind, a legacy as multifaceted and challenging as the man himself. As the myth of Che Guevara stretched across continents, it found fertile soil in the tumultuous landscape of the 1960s. The era was anything but dull, a time when the world felt like it was teetering on the brink of transformation or disaster, depending on your perspective. Che's image morphed from a snapshot in a Bolivian jungle to an icon of rebellion, a face that launched 1,000 protests. The irony: his visage, synonymous with anti-capitalist fervor, became one of capitalism's favorite products, slapped on everything from t-shirts to coffee mugs. Now, let's not kid ourselves about this metamorphosis. Che's iconic image, famously captured by photographer Alberto Corda in 1960, wasn't initially intended for commercial use. Corda's shot of Che, eyes blazing with intensity, became the Mona Lisa of revolution, enigmatic and endlessly reproduced. But the transformation into a countercultural icon didn't happen in a vacuum. It was fueled by a cocktail of global discontent, youth rebellion, and the power of mass media. In the United States, the 1960s counterculture movement was in full swing. The civil rights movement, anti-Vietnam War protests, and a general disillusionment with the status quo made Che a symbol of defiance. Here was a man who had dared to challenge imperialism and died for his beliefs, a narrative that resonated with young protesters who were fed up with being told to sit down and shut up. Che's image became a shorthand for radical change, a visual rallying cry that transcended language barriers. But let's not overlook the contradictions. Che's anti-capitalist ideals were clear as day. He famously declared, "The true revolutionary is guided by great feelings of love." Yet, his image became a capitalist's dream, plastered on merchandise that sold like hotcakes. In the 1980s, Che's face was printed on millions of t-shirts, not by revolutionaries, but by entrepreneurs who saw dollar signs in his gaze. It was the ultimate irony, a man who fought against materialism becoming a materialist icon. As the legend of Che spread, it inspired revolutionary movements worldwide. His writings, particularly the manual on guerrilla warfare, were studied by freedom fighters and rebels from Latin America to Africa to the Middle East. In Nicaragua, the Sandinistas invoked Che's spirit in their struggle against the Somoza dictatorship. In South Africa, anti-apartheid activists found inspiration in his calls for liberation. Che's dream of sparking global revolution was alive, even if his methods weren't always practical or successful. The economic backdrop of these movements was crucial. In many of these regions, poverty was rampant, and wealth inequality was as glaring as a neon sign in the desert. In such environments, Che's message of redistribution and social justice struck a chord. The promise of a more equitable society held undeniable appeal, even if the path there was fraught with peril and paradox. Che's impact on modern political figures is another fascinating chapter. Leaders like Venezuela's Hugo Chavez embraced his legacy, using Che's image and rhetoric to bolster their own revolutionary credentials. Chavez, with his fiery speeches and anti-imperialist stance, often evoked Che's spirit in his vision for a Bolivarian revolution. Similarly, in Bolivia, Evo Morales, the country's first indigenous president, drew on Che's ideals as he sought to empower the marginalized and redistribute wealth. Yet, let's be honest about the complexities here. Che's methods, rooted in armed struggle, are a tough sell in today's world, where nuanced diplomacy and economic strategies often take precedence over guerrilla warfare. The romantic notion of the insurgent fighter clashes with the messy realities of modern governance. Che's legacy is both an inspiration and a cautionary tale, a reminder of the power of ideals and the pitfalls of dogma. The commodification of Che's image didn't stop with t-shirts. It extended into music, art, and literature, where his likeness became a symbol of youthful rebellion and countercultural chic. Bands like Rage Against the Machine and The Clash drew on Che's imagery and ethos, channeling his revolutionary spirit into their music. In this way, Che's legacy transcended politics, becoming a cultural touchstone for generations seeking to question authority and challenge the status quo. But let's not sugarcoat it. This commodification is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it keeps Che's ideals alive in popular consciousness, sparking debates and critical thought. On the other hand, it risks reducing a complex historical figure to a simplistic icon, divorced from the realities of his life and struggles. Che Guevara wasn't just a face on a t-shirt. He was a man of contradictions, driven by a vision that was as flawed as it was inspiring. As we continue to unravel Che's legacy, it's crucial to acknowledge both the romantic allure and the gritty truth. His story is a tapestry of idealism and pragmatism, of dreams and harsh realities. Che Guevara remains a symbol of resistance, his image a potent reminder of the power and the peril of revolutionary zeal. As we delve deeper into his impact, we must remember that history is more than just the stories we tell. It's the lessons we learn and the questions we continue to ask. And there you have it, Che Guevara, revolutionary icon and capitalist product, a figure whose influence defies easy categorization. Stay tuned as we explore the next chapter in this saga, where myths meet reality in a dance as complex as the man himself. Che Guevara's legacy is a tangled web, a blend of myth and reality as complex as one of those tangled earbuds you find at the bottom of your backpack. But let's dive in and try to tease apart the threads, shall we? Che's image is one of the most recognized in the world, and it's curious that a man who abhorred materialism has become an inadvertent poster boy for pop culture. If he were around today, Che might be bemused, if not outright horrified, to see his likeness gracing products as mundane as keychains and mousepads, items he probably would have considered bourgeois distractions. He might even quip, "I died for this," as he witnessed his face plastered on everything but the moon. Yet, the fascination with Che isn't just about the image. It's about what he represented, a challenge to the established order, a rebellion against the status quo. His story resonates in a world where inequality remains stubbornly entrenched. Che's call for social justice, for a world where wealth isn't hoarded by a few, still strikes a chord. But let's not get carried away on a cloud of revolutionary rhetoric. Che's vision was as much about the harsh reality of armed struggle as it was about utopian dreams. His belief in the necessity of violence to achieve political ends is a sobering reminder of the gap between ideals and execution. Let's talk numbers for a moment. Che's revolutionary campaigns were often a logistical nightmare, with resources stretched thinner than a college student's budget. In Bolivia, his ragtag group numbered just 50 at its peak, a far cry from the robust army needed to topple a government. The CIA-backed Bolivian army, in contrast, was better equipped and more motivated, underscoring the stark economic realities Che faced. The gritty truth is that revolution without resources is like trying to run a marathon without shoes, possible, but painful and unlikely to succeed. The economic backdrop of Che's era is crucial to understanding his appeal. The 1960s were a time of extreme disparities, with Latin America's wealth gap as glaring as a Hollywood spotlight. Che's call for economic redistribution was a direct response to this inequity, a challenge to a system that left millions in poverty while a select few thrived. His vision of a socialist utopia, where resources were shared and everyone had enough, was idealistic to be sure, but it tapped into a deep vein of frustration and hope. Fast forward to today, and Che's legacy continues to inspire and confound. His writings and speeches remain a touchstone for activists, a rallying cry for those seeking change. Yet, the romanticized image of Che often overshadows the more nuanced reality. He was a man of contradictions, an idealist who didn't shy away from harsh methods, a leader whose charisma was matched by a willingness to make difficult, sometimes ruthless, decisions. This duality makes him a challenging figure to pin down, a symbol of both inspiration and caution. The myth and the man, it's a duality that persists in the way Che's legacy is interpreted around the world. In Venezuela, Hugo Chavez evoked Che's spirit as he pursued his own brand of socialism, while in Cuba, Che is still celebrated as a national hero, his legacy enshrined in monuments and museums. Yet, in places like Miami, where many Cuban exiles settled, Che is viewed with far less reverence, seen more as a symbol of oppression than liberation. This dichotomy reflects the complex tapestry of Che's impact, a story that is as much about perception as it is about reality. Now, let's inject a little of that modern humor we promised. Imagine Che, the ardent anti-capitalist, walking into a Starbucks, and finding his face on a coffee mug. He might raise an eyebrow and mutter something about the irony of it all, or picture him scrolling through social media, encountering memes that both idolize and satirize him in equal measure. Would he laugh at the absurdity or shake his head at the commercialization of his ideals? It's a scenario as amusing as it is thought-provoking, a reminder that history has a way of turning even the staunchest revolutionary into a cultural artifact. But beyond the humor, there's a serious point to be made. Chi's enduring appeal is a testament to the power of ideas, even when those ideas are simplified or commodified. His life was a whirlwind of action and conviction, a testament to the belief that change is possible, even if the road there is fraught with challenges. Yet, it's crucial to remember that Chi was a human being, not a saint. His legacy is a reminder that while ideals can inspire, the path to realizing them is often messy and complicated. So, as we wrap up this exploration of Che Guevara's legacy, let's consider what we've learned. Chi's story is one of passion and paradox, a journey that continues to resonate because it speaks to the enduring human desire for justice and equality. But it's also a cautionary tale about the complexities of translating ideals into reality, a reminder that the road to revolution is often paved with unintended consequences. In the end, Che Guevara remains a symbol of defiance and hope, a figure whose impact transcends time and place. His legacy is a tapestry of myth and reality, a story that invites us to question, to learn, and to reflect on the power of ideas in shaping our world. Whether you see him as a hero or a cautionary figure, there's no denying the indelible mark Che has left on history, a legacy as complex and compelling as the man himself.